Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Hermione was sitting in the room she was sharing with Ginny, staring at the wall. Things had changed. Things had changed, and she suddenly didn't know anymore when it had happened or why. Until last summer, she had been Harry and Ron's best friend. They had been close, inseparable, more siblings than actual friends. At least, that had been her point of view. Then summer had come around, and when Harry returned, he had been different. He had been strange, had forgotten things about her that he had known for years. Hermione had been concerned. So she had done what she had always done when she was concerned. She went to people she trusted and hoped that they would listen and take care of it. That might have cost me Harry. The bitter thought came unbidden to her mind, and she closed her eyes, trying to suppress her tears at the pain that came with it. Nevertheless, Hermione couldn't deny it. Not in this very moment. Not anymore. Hermione? She blinked, tried to wipe away the tears that had threatened to fall from her eyes, and turned towards the door. Ron was standing in the doorway, looking at her with concern in his eyes. He looked mature, different in his own way, and for a moment Hermione couldn't help but wonder when she had been left behind, when her friends had started to grow up and she hadn't. "I'm okay, Ron," she finally assured him. "Really, I'm okay." Ron just looked at her skeptically. "Dad is going to the Wizengamot now," he finally said, instead of pointing out that Hermione was still sniffing and struggling to keep her tears in check. "He's taking Charlie and Bill with him." Hermione blinked. "Why?" she asked slowly. "A bit run over by the way Ron said it, as if it was natural for his father to take his brothers to the Wizengamot. For a moment, Hermione wondered what else she had missed about the world she was living in now. She had missed so much, more than she thought even after she had been sure that she was caught up with everything. Magic, traditions, customs, history, beliefs. She had read everything she could find, and yet missed things that she needed to know to really understand her world. She had come to the magical world and thought of it as similar to the one she had came from. It had been a mistake. The magical world was its own country with its own laws, customs, beliefs, its own culture, and Hermione hadn't understood it until someone had shoved it into her face. It hurt to know that for once she wasn't the one who actually knew more about such an important matter. "Bill is Dad's heir," Ron said, answering her question with a casual shrug. "And Charlie is the Pruitt heir, as the second-born son. They need to attend. It's the first meeting of the Wizengamot. Heirs and lords of the different houses all attend, as long as the house has a lord." Hermione frowned. "There are houses who don't have lords?" she asked. Ron blinked. "Well," he said slowly, "those who lost their lords and their heir is still too young to take over." This time he sounded a bit unsure while answering. "Also," Ron continued nevertheless, his words slowing down while he tried to talk through the things he knew. "Houses that are declared extinguished but are still counted because of their influence. There are dead houses that are part of the Wizengamot." Hermione interrupted him with disbelief in her voice. "Why?" Ron shrugged. "Who knows," he said. "I guess for some like Emrys or LeFay it's just because they're historic or some such. And others, well, it's not as if I ever learned all that stuff, so—" He shrugged, dismissing it without finishing his sentence. Hermione blinked. Ron shifted in the doorway, looking a bit uncomfortable. "It's not that I ever needed to know," he justified himself. "I'm the sixth son. I don't want to work in the ministry, and well, my family actually doesn't have a seat in the Wizengamot." Hermione frowned. "If they don't, then why are your father and brothers going?" Ron shrugged. "Because Mum's family had one," he said, "and it was part of a grand family. It gives us standing in the wizarding world, enough to claim a minor seat in the Wizengamot at least." Hermione frowned. "A minor seat?" she asked. Ron shrugged. "Dad told me we're only getting it because we're joining the re-emerging grand family. It's tied to the family and the fact that we're Pruitts by blood, or, well, marriage for Dad. Mum can't take the seat because of some old rules in the family that have never been abandoned or some such. So Dad is the one who will take the Weasley seat and Charlie is the one who will take the Pruitt seat, he said and wrinkled his nose. It's bloody awful. And a mess. Family magics are dang hard to understand. Then his frown deepened further. And if I'm totally unlucky, I'll be forced to learn that bloody stuff as well, he added, and Hermione gawked at him. It's something to do with Percy, and nobody knowing if he took after the Pruitt line or the Weasley. If he took after the Pruitt, then I'm fine. If he didn't, then I'm the next heir, because Fred and George somehow managed to get themselves out of that whole mess. Probably threatened to prank Charlie if he ever thought to make them heirs, or some such. At that he grumbled a bit about them being bloody brilliant for it and wishing that he had the same leverage as them. Hermione just blinked, wiped her tears again and thought it over. Sounds complicated, she finally settled on. Ron wrinkled his nose unhappily. It's bloody awful, he agreed, but Mum and Dad are rock solid on doing it anyway, and Charlie and Bill agree, so the rest of us doesn't get a choice. That was actually something that Hermione understood. Her thoughts turned back to Harry. Do you think that Harry would have... She stopped, not willing to talk about Harry as if he was dead. Ron shrugged. I doubt he would have gone to the Wizengamot last year if he had been able to back then. Ron said slowly, but this Harry? If he didn't already have a seat, I guess he would have done the same as Dad. And that wasn't reassuring at all. Why? Hermione couldn't help but ask. Why are you so calm about it? Shouldn't you be more upset? I mean, he's still there, Ron interrupted her before she could say anything further. I know, you might feel that he's not, because he isn't the same anymore, but he's still there, and shouldn't be that the thing that matters the most. Hermione opened her mouth to object, but then closed it again. Her thoughts wandered back to the day after they returned to Grimmauld Place, the day she had finally gotten an explanation from Harry. Explain, she had ordered back then the moment they had found themselves alone in one of the rooms. Harry had just looked at her. What exactly do you wish me to explain to you? He countered. At that Hermione actually had to think about the answer. Black? Regulus black. I mean, she listed, her lips pressing together. Rituals, Umbridge, everything. For a moment Harry had looked at her with an expression that made her wonder if he'd just stand up and vanish, leaving her with all her questions. Then he sighed. It's complicated, he said slowly. Reg-A. The Dementor attack in the summer had some consequences and Reg-A's been helping me ever since. He eyed her tiredly, looking already done with her questions when he had barely started to answer. The magical world is just 3 steps from utter collapse, he added, and closed his eyes tiredly. It's been getting worse and worse over the last 100 years, or at least that's what it feels like to me. He shook his head. The last time something like this happened, the loss of rituals and knowledge, the founders of Hogwarts were the ones who prevented it in the end. He met her eyes tiredly. The school tightened the ties of the magical world and kept the traditions alive. Knowledge of ancient rituals was returned to the broader populace, and I guess it saved magical world in some way back then, even if it wasn't obvious. Hermione frowned. That has nothing to do. Some things are integrated in your magic, Harry interrupted her with a sigh. Ignoring it won't help you. I'm a Muggle-born, not a pure blood, Hermione corrected him, but was stopped in her denial that she had anything to do with all that by a simple question on Harry's side. And where did your magic come from? He asked. Hermione stopped. For a moment she stared at him with an open mouth, then she closed her mouth to a firm line, ready to defend her status as a Muggle-born even to her best friend. Harry, on the other hand, had a different idea. My mother was a Muggle-born as well, Hermione, he pointed out before she could get fully worked up. She was a descendant of the Flamels, their heir. That actually ensured that Hermione stared at Harry as if she had never seen him before. What? She whispered, and Harry was all too happy to shred her world into 1,000 pieces as an answer. My mother's magic came from her ancestry, an ancestry that showed that her closest living blood relatives, her ancestors, were Nicholas and Perenelle Flamel. She's descended from first-born child of the Flamels. She was the heir, because unlike my aunt, she inherited the magic, he told Hermione calmly. That has nothing to do with prejudice and everything to do with family magics and the way they are inherited. Magic doesn't come from nowhere. Not my mother's, and not yours. So where does your magic come from, Hermione? Hermione frowned. I don't know, and hadn't that stung to admit. It doesn't matter, Harry said, because, in the end it comes from somewhere, so tell me, if you ever find out and meet someone who either belongs to your family or can train you in your family's magic, will you take them up on the offer, or ignore them? That was actually an easy question to answer. I'd ask to be taught, Hermione said. Harry nodded. The Blacks are my family, he said. Not from my mother's side, but my father's. I stood by Sirius when I didn't even really understand how deeply magical connections can be. I stood by Red when I met him, and I will stand by my family in the Wizengamot as well. He had seemed so old when he said that. So old, and so different. Do you know the rituals Neville spoke about? She finally asked him. Were you taught? Is this why you're different? And what about Umbridge? Was Ron right? Did you do something to her? Harry actually looked surprised at that. Not bad instincts, Ron, he said, sounding as if he was talking more to himself than her. Hermione gawked at him. So, you did? You were the one who ensured that Umbridge? It was my duty. Hermione, Harry gently interrupted her. There are duties bound to my existence. Umbridge, I couldn't let her be. I couldn't stop her. Not immediately, not without revealing her, without a backlash towards me and others, but I couldn't stand by and watch forever. Hermione frowned. Why? She whispered. Why did you do something about her? Why didn't you go to Dumbledore, to McGonagall, to every other teacher? Harry just smiled sadly. Because the headmaster of Hogwarts should have stepped in the moment he noticed what she was doing. He ignored it. Harry shook his head. Hogwarts is closed now, and it was only partly Umbridge's and the Ministry's fault. You have to open your eyes, Hermione. Adults are human, and it doesn't matter that people mean to be good. The path to hell is paved with good intentions, Hermione, and that isn't only true for you and your actions, but for the former headmasters as well. With that, Harry had turned and left. Ever since, Hermione had been staring at the walls of the room she was in, her thoughts going in circles. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. She remembered her actions towards Harry. She had tried to help him. She had gone to the teachers, to Dumbledore, and yet it had only pushed Harry farther and farther away from her. It had taken her days, long agonizing hours of thoughts, until she could finally accept what had happened. What she had done. She had tried to save Harry, but in the process she had lost him, and it hurt to think that she should have listened more. You're right, she agreed hollowly with Ron. He's still here, and it should have been enough. It should have been. It wasn't, because while he was still there, Hermione, unlike Ron, might have lost him nevertheless. That thought was what hurt the most. My lord, Voldemort looked up from the plans in front of him. The Death Eater who had entered stopped in the door. We found him, my lord. That actually made Voldemort turn around. Where? He asked, his voice more a snarl than polite. Since Christmas, his Death Eaters had been on the lookout for him. Since Christmas, everything had changed. Voldemort's plans had come crushing down and his current anonymity had been threatened. It was the vampire's fault. Since the day the vampire had turned traitor, Voldemort had felt on edge. He knew that the vampire had been around for quite a lot of Voldemort's plans, and had been around even more often, without anybody really noticing thanks to his tendency to hang out in unusual places. And then he had gone and betrayed them. Voldemort had raged after the vampire had walked out. Several of his Death Eaters had suffered for it. Some of them were still not fully healed, even though it was January now. Find him. Voldemort had told them the day the vampire walked out on them. Find him and bring him back so that I can kill him. Voldemort wanted revenge. He wanted the vampire to suffer for his deception, a deception that shouldn't have been possible in the first place. Nobody should have known that I'm not the heir of Slytherin. Voldemort had silently raged the night after. Nobody should have even suspected. After all, Tom Riddle had ensured that nobody suspected it since he found out when he was 16. Back then he had gone to the goblins after confronting his worthless family from both sides. He had expected to gain lordship of the house he was already part of in Hogwarts, But the goblins had seen it differently. "You're not part of Slytherin family," they had told him while sneering at him. "The Gaunts, the family you descend from, were disinherited on 31st October in 1568 by the Lord of Slytherin. But the main family is dead," Tom Riddle had countered. "Shouldn't go the line to me as the only living descendant, nevertheless." But the goblins had denied him. They had claimed that Slytherin had still descendants alive who were closer related to the main family and didn't belong to a disinherited part. Voldemort hadn't wanted to believe them, so in the end, 16-year-old Tom Riddle decided that he would claim the name nevertheless. Since then, Voldemort had done everything in his power to ensure that everybody knew he was the heir of Slytherin and just unwilling to take the lordship as long as mudbloods were allowed to walk the streets. And people had believed him. Even Dumbledore had believed him. Yet after all those years with no questions, the vampire had come. He had come and sworn loyalty, a loyalty that Voldemort could use and definitely didn't think of rejecting. The vampire should have felt compelled to follow his oath, and yet he had gone and betrayed Voldemort. In Voldemort's ears, he could still hear the haunting words of the vampire after Voldemort had reminded him of his oath. "You swore me fealty," Voldemort had said, so sure that it would keep the vampire in line. So sure that his lies had turned into truth over the passing decades. "No," the vampire had countered, and it was then that Voldemort felt the first shadow of a doubt when it came to the loyalty of the vampire he had accepted as a safe ally into their midst. A sworn oath to a lord couldn't be broken after all. "I swore fealty to the Lord of Slytherin." Voldemort had tried to reason with the vampire, reminding him that there was no other lord but Voldemort when it came to Slytherin, but the vampire had known. Worse, the vampire had known something that Voldemort hadn't even known, and that Voldemort hadn't even noticed having been uttered until nearly a week later. "There's always been just one Lord of Slytherin." Those words haunted him. They made him shiver, and they were part of the reason why Voldemort had gone and ordered his Death Eaters to find the traitor immediately. He needed to have the vampire back in his grasp, to find out about Slytherin and what he knew that nobody seemed to know. Just one lord, the words echoed in his mind. Just one. It was a chilling thought, and Voldemort needed the vampire back. He needed to know. He needed to know about Slytherin, and even more important, he needed to know about the knowledge of the vampire concerning the locket and other trinkets. What did the vampire know about the locket? How had he found out? How had he gotten it? And did he know that it was a Horcrux, one out of many? Voldemort's fists clenched. "He cannot know," had been his mantra since that day. Horcruxes are a technique rarely used, and even harder to find, and that vampire can't be old enough to remember the last person who used it, or old enough to remember a time where the possibility of a Horcrux had still be widely known. It had been centuries since both happened, and even the oldest vampire on Earth would have long since turned into dust before reaching present time, if he had lived through it. 200 to 300 years, Voldemort told himself. That's the average age for a vampire to live. Eldred Whirple, the author of Blood Brothers, My Life Amongst the Vampires, just confirmed it, according to Lucius. The man had spoken about this new book in the summer. Voldemort also remembered that Lucius had added that the man had a friend among the vampires who had given him the information for his book. Back then, they had contemplated if they could use Whirple to get an in with the vampire community. Voldemort had disregarded it when Sanguini had presented himself in front of him and sworn his oath to Slytherin, an oath that Voldemort had believed to be able to use. Instead, the vampire had used the oath to get information, to betray them and their cause. He shouldn't have known, Voldemort repeated in his mind, deep in his thoughts. He shouldn't have. There is no evidence anymore that my part of the family was disinherited. I ensured it, and there should have been no way to find out about the locket. But then the later one could have happened somehow. While Voldemort was careful with what he told his followers, he knew for a fact that the vampire, for all his ability to annoy and make a nuisance out of himself, could also fade into the shadows if he wanted to. There had been a time or two Voldemort had only noticed that the vampire had been in the room when the vampire finally drew attention to himself. Back then, Voldemort hadn't been bothered. He had believed to be safe thanks to the vow. Now his plans were in jeopardy because of his carelessness. Nevertheless, it shouldn't have happened, Voldemort raged in his mind. He should have had no way of knowing. Vampires don't live long enough to. It was then that another unbidden voice of the past interrupted his thought process. Have you known that vampires have their own stupid legends about an immortal, my lord? One of his Death Eaters had told him in the First War. Just like the legend of the Eternal Prince some crackpots of the wizarding world believe in, just that unlike with us, the most of those blood-sucking monsters believe in this fairy tale. We could use it. If we do it right, we could use that legend to get them to follow you and fight for our cause. Back then they had never had the chance to try and do it, but now, more than a decade later, those words suddenly haunted Voldemort. What if it wasn't just a legend? Voldemort had gained immortality. What if one of the vampires had done the same? What if he was still alive, and what if Sanguini knew him and therefore knew about the lie? What if that vampire is Slytherin? Voldemort dismissed that thought instantly. Ridiculous. Yes, Sanguini shouldn't have known that Voldemort wasn't the Lord of Slytherin, but Voldemort was sure that there was another explanation than a living legend. The same was true for the Horcrux. The vampire shouldn't have known, but at the same time, Voldemort couldn't rule out that the vampire had somehow stumbled over the information somehow. That thought brought him to a sudden stop. Nagini. He hadn't heard or seen anything from Nagini for quite some time. With a frown and slight concern, Voldemort tried to remember when he had seen the snake last. He knew that she had been off and on an assignment in the Ministry. She had an easier time to get in and monitor who was watching the prophecy compared to his Death Eaters. After all, still, when had he seen her last? It wasn't unusual for her to vanish for weeks on end, especially when Voldemort gave her something to do, but when, after a bit of thought, Voldemort was fairly sure that she had been around shortly after the vampire had turned traitor. He wasn't 100% sure, but he remembered that he had seen her last one morning, and that she had told him that she planned to stay in the Ministry for at least a week or two. The vampire had no way of knowing that she was a Horcrux as well, Voldemort reassured himself. Not without being able to perform a legilimency attack that can even penetrate my shields. Something that Voldemort was reasonably sure was impossible. For a moment the memory of a black-haired, green-eyed healer tried to take a hold of his mind, but Voldemort squashed it ruthlessly. It had been Voldemort in the healer's mind and not the other way around. Before Voldemort's thoughts could drift away further, the Death Eater in front of him answered the question. Voldemort had asked about the whereabouts of the missing vampire. He's been seen in Diagon Alley, the Death Eater said, pulling Voldemort fully out of his thoughts. Finally, the vampire had been found. Hopefully it wasn't yet too late and the vampire hadn't gone and tattled Voldemort's plans to Dumbledore or his like. Voldemort shuddered at that thought before consoling himself that he had moved up his plans to ensure that even if the vampire had tattled, the information would still be wrong. It had been hard to reduce his planning period to ensure that he could undertake his plans faster, but thanks to the vampire it had been necessary. Voldemort wouldn't be stopped. He would reach his goals. He would take over the Ministry, purge their world of the mudbloods, and then ensure that the world would follow his wishes. He would ensure that wizards would end up in their rightful place, at the top of the food chain. But first he needed to know something else important. He had fallen once because he hadn't known the full prophecy about him and the Potter brat. He wouldn't make that mistake twice. Nevertheless, the vampire was nearly as important as getting his hands on the prophecy. He needed to silence the creature before it could destroy Voldemort's plans or find more of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Diagon Alley, Voldemort repeated coldly. The vampire was in Diagon Alley. Finally, now he just had to get him killed, whatever was easier. For a moment he hesitated. He knew that theoretically he could try and send some people to monitor the vampire and kill him when he was secluded. But the chances of losing their chance to eliminate the vampire like that were high. Voldemort didn't know the full extent of the vampire's abilities and therefore couldn't risk it. But attacking the vampire in Diagon Alley had its own risks. Exposure. He knew that a raid, and it would have to be a raid since he didn't dare to send a single assassin after a vampire who had shown to be able to survive a room full of Death Eaters trying to kill him, would draw attention. Attention on Voldemort. He had liked his anonymity. Of course there had been Azkaban, but in the end the Ministry had dismissed his return. Azkaban might have been dismissed, but an open Death Eater attack? Unlikely. Which also meant that if he conducted the raid, it would be the end of his anonymity. For a moment Voldemort hesitated in his decision. He had plans, but since Christmas he had felt impelled to move them up. The vampire knew them. If Voldemort kept it like before, he could be stopped. Voldemort clenched his fists. He needed the prophecy, and he needed to silence the vampire. There was just one way to accomplish both, and luckily today was the perfect day to do both. With that, he made his decision. "Take some others," he told the Death Eater. "I want you to conduct a raid on Diagon Alley." "A raid, my lord?" the Death Eater asked, surprised. "Ensure that the vampire is either brought in or killed," Voldemort added coldly. The Death Eater immediately inclined his head. "Of course, my lord," he agreed. Voldemort took a deep breath. "I will go to the Ministry," he decided calmly. "I need the prophecy." And thanks to the vampire, he couldn't wait until he found a way to ensure that Potter got it for him. But that didn't matter. After all, what better time to steal the prophecy could exist but the day of the Wizengamot meeting, combined with a raid to distract everybody not invested in the meeting. After leaving Hermione to her thoughts, Ron turned away and instead walked downwards and into the dining room. There, his oldest brothers and father were gathered. For a moment Ron silently watched his brothers interacting. Both of them were clothed in formal-looking robes, something he couldn't remember Charlie ever wearing, and Bill, well, maybe the other man had worn robes like that once when Ron had been smaller and Bill had still been living at home. When he entered, both of his brothers looked up. His father, also in formal wear, the robes looking more expensive than Ron had ever seen his father wear before, was still straightening up his robes and adjusting his collar. "You all right, Ron?" Bill asked, and their father turned away from his task of setting himself to right to also look at his youngest son. Ron shrugged. "I'm not totally sure," he told them, his gaze traveling over their changed appearance. It felt odd seeing his family so well dressed. And it felt even odder to know that his family, who had always fought against poverty, was now, thanks to their agreement to enter the Grand Family, for the first time quite comfortable. Belonging to a family, Ron had found out, came with a certain security that there was actually somebody there who'd look out for your well-being. Nevertheless, coming home from Hogwarts, just to be taken aside by his father, had been strange. "There's going to be a change within this family," his father had told him the moment he and Ron's eldest brothers had been able to get those who still went to Hogwarts alone. "This isn't something that anybody else needs to know for now, but coming January there will be a difference in our standing in the magical world." The four children who had been at Hogwarts for the last few months exchanged a disbelieving look with each other. "What kind of change?" Fred asked finally. His father sighed. "Our family was offered an opportunity," he answered. "Your eldest brothers and I discussed it and in the end decided to agree to it." Ron had frowned at that. "What kind of opportunity would be offered to our family?" he asked, confused. "It's not that anybody would have anything to gain from giving us a chance to change our standing. And in the wizarding world a lot of things were based on standing, ability, connections and blood." Ron had known that from childhood on. He had resented it. He knew that there was barely a chance for him to change his fortune. He wasn't particularly smart, he wasn't charming, his family was seen as less, and even though they counted as pure-blooded, it wouldn't help them without the necessary connections to get them further in life. Ron had basically seen no chance to get out of the prejudice that surrounded his family. And he wasn't an idiot. He knew that his brothers had known the same. There was a reason why Bill had gone and worked for the goblins, who would offer an opportunity to at least all those who were vaguely gifted in certain areas. There was a reason why Charlie had gone and decided to leave Britain to escape his fate. There was a reason why Percy tried everything in his ability to make himself useful in the Ministry. Ron guessed that from all his brothers, the only ones who had never struggled against their fate were the twins, and those two had the ability to change their own fate, thanks to their particular kind of genius, and therefore didn't count. A grand family, his father said in that moment. We were offered to take up our place in a grand family, which gives us the right of a seat in the Wizengamot, Bill added. And the right to claim Mum's line even though she can't actually inherit it because of the stipulation of a male heir in her family line, Charlie added. And while Ron wasn't the best versed in wizarding politics, he at least knew the basics that his mother had taught him when he was a child. His elder twin brothers were even better when it came to it. You're going to renounce your status as a Weasley, George said, looking at his older brother with a frown. Charlie hesitated, but in the end nodded. Yes, he said. I'll be Charles Pruitt from the moment I'll take up the Pruitt seat in the Wizengamot. Ron couldn't help but deepening his frown at the admission. Why? He wanted to know. Why do we even need to take the seat? We don't need to, Charlie replied calmly, but that seat, that family, it's an opportunity. It can change something for our family. And Ron, good at chess, understood. Suddenly, the Pruitt seat would give his brother the ability to change his fate, to up his standing and maybe, just maybe, have a say in the making of their world. If they were lucky, with the Pruitt seat, the newly formed Weasley seat of lesser standing, and the fact that they'd have the backing of a grand family would give them the ability to change their world into something, maybe even something more just for everyone. He wasn't the only one who got the implication. This alliance, Fred said slowly, what does it entail? What will change for us now that we will be part of it? Because Ron and all of his siblings knew that good fortune never came for free. His father and his eldest brothers exchanged a look. There will be some mandatory lessons for all of you, Bill said, and we will be asked to act in a certain way in public. Charlie added, but all in all, it's a good deal. His father had closed their short explanation before he actually elaborated in detail. Back then, Ron had listened, and after thought about it day and night. It had taken a while to actually understand the changes it would bring. The moment his brothers and father took up their mantle, Ron would have opportunity no matter if he just was a younger son or an heir. He knew that theoretically as an heir, his opportunities were better, but frankly, being an heir also came with responsibilities Ron didn't want to have. If he was able to choose, he preferred to be a younger son, as odd as it sounded in his own ears even after thinking about it for more than a week. Ron guessed that sometime in the last half a year he had actually grown up. He knew that maybe a year earlier he would have wanted to be the heir, to have the prestige that came with it. But either the fact that he had heard what being the heir entailed, and it sounded like so much work, or the fact that he had finally started to mature, odder things had happened, had changed his outlook. You're right, Ron? Charlie asked in that moment, bringing him back to the present. Yes, Ron said, his gaze lingering thoughtfully on his brothers. It's odd, you know. When his brothers and his father looked at him with raised eyebrows, Ron shrugged. Everything's changing, he pointed out, and it's not just us, our family, it's everything else as well. Hermione, Harry, everything. He shook his head. Sometimes I have trouble to actually wrap my head around it, he said slowly. Sometimes, well, it feels as if everything started to move forward a lot faster than ever since the last summer. He shrugged. Harry changed back then, he said, almost to himself. For a while, I think I was in danger of losing his friendship. And even if I think we got a bit better again, it's still different. He's different. Then the family, I just guess that I'm finally realizing that no matter what I do, nothing will stay the same. He couldn't help but sound a bit dejected at that thought. His eldest brothers exchanged a look at that. Does it really matter? Bill finally asked. I mean, even if we've changed, we're still us. Ron sighed and closed his eyes. His mind drifted back to what he said to Hermione. Harry was still there. He might be different. He might be older, more weary and grown in a way neither Ron nor Hermione were yet, but in the end he was still there. It was odd to have to admit to himself what he had told Hermione already. No, Ron said, and then stepped up to help Charlie straighten his robes. No, I think it doesn't. and he couldn't help but think that admitting that felt oddly freeing, as if a burden he had carried had finally been lifted. It really doesn't. Stepping out of the house without anybody noticing had been as easy as breathing, especially because most people of the house were about to get ready for the Wizengamot or were interacting with those who were. Harry was the exception. He was ready. Ready, except of one single detail. The meeting place Harry went to was known to him for hundreds of years already, and the same could be said for the person meeting him there. "Uncle," he greeted the old man waiting for him, his eyes traveling over his uncle's frail body in concern. The other man smiled at him. "Salvatio," he returned the greeting and then reached out to embrace him. "It's been a long time." Harry snorted. "I saw you not even a year ago, uncle," he countered, clearly amused by the older-looking man's antics. "That's not that long compared to other times." His uncle just ruffled his hair. "But you changed so much in that time, my dear nephew," he countered, his eyes traveling Salah's face, taking in the differences. "I can't even remember you ever looking that young, except when you actually were that age." Harry rolled his eyes. "That's because being 15 is an inconvenience I can do without if I don't have to," he countered. "And maybe you've forgotten, but I'm pretty sure I had to go through being 15 just a bit more than 100 years ago." "Ah yes," his uncle agreed, amused. "But I didn't see you back then, did I?" For a moment, Harry looked at his uncle. Then he sighed. "Point," he agreed. His uncle, on the other hand, looked him over some more. "Tell me why," he said in the end, after a long, content silence. Harry pressed his lips together. "Why what, uncle?" he countered, his eyes not meeting the other man. For a moment his uncle scrutinized him, then he sighed. "You called me," his uncle said slowly. "You want to step in the open. You are gathering allies as much as you can. Tell me why." Harry sighed and closed his eyes, still not able to look at the older-looking man. "There are multiple reasons," he finally confessed, "and I'm not sure if I should tell you." For a moment, Harry had contemplated to say something else, but in the end, the truth won out. If not anything else, he owed his uncle the truth. At that, silence descended upon them while his uncle took in Harry's words. "That bad?" he finally asked. Harry's fists clenched. "No," he said, "but there are reasons in there that might be against your look of things. You and I, we might be family, but we also have our own lives, our own friends and acquaintances. I'm not sure how you'd react if I spoke up against one of your friends." At that, his uncle's eyes sharpened, and before Harry could think of stopping it, a hand reached under his chin and forced him to look up and meet his uncle's gaze. His uncle's green eyes were as green as his own, and far more serious than Harry could them remember being ever before. "That friend or acquaintance of mine," his uncle said, and something akin to fury could be heard in his voice. "What did he do?" Harry tried to look away, but his uncle's hand stopped him. "Uncle," he tried, but was interrupted by an even more forceful reply. "What did they do?" his uncle growled. Harry sighed. "Most of it didn't matter to me anymore," Harry finally replied hesitatingly. "I guess if it had been just that, from back then before everything, I might have ended up ignoring it, maybe even forgiving it." His uncle's free hand clenched to a fist. "I don't like what I'm hearing right now," he said, his green eyes burning. "Because whatever you are talking about, that sounds—" His uncle shook his head. "Tell me what you mean with before," he requested finally. "What kind of before is the before you are talking about exactly?" Harry removed his uncle's hand from his chin and turned away from the other man. "Before," he said slowly, "means before everything." He hesitated shortly, but his uncle continued to look at him, waiting for him to speak up again. In the end, Harry rubbed his face. How much do you know? How much do you suspect?" he finally asked, before clarifying. "Of my past, I mean." For a moment he was met with silence, then his uncle hummed softly. "Some," he finally admitted. And when Harry turned, his uncle shrugged. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "You wrote me. You used the Slytherin signet. I remember the time you helped the Slytherin family vanish. I remember what you told me when you needed an end to Britain, about the time travel. At that, Harry averted his eyes again, but his uncle wasn't done yet. I remember what Peverell said about your heritage, the fact that you're a Phoenix-born child, the fact that you have memories of other lives, or maybe that you lived other lives before the one I met you, he continued, his eyes on Harry, kind and at the same time strong in a way that gave Harry the freedom to relax a bit. His uncle seemed to see the change in Harry's posture, because he reached out and took a hold of Harry's shoulder. I'm not an idiot, he told Harry softly. I can see that you're more than you ever told me. I can see in your eyes that there are things I don't know and that I might never know. Uncle, Harry said at that, his eyes closing and his shoulders tensing up again, but his uncle continued, unrelentingly. I also know that you didn't just write to me to have another helping hand in the upcoming January meeting. No, Salvatore. He shook Harry a bit, not hurting him, but gripping a bit tighter nevertheless. No matter what else you want to tell me, I know that there's something more going on than you told me until now. For a moment Harry sighed and closed his eyes. Again. His body was tense as if waiting for a blow. I'm sorry, he finally said slowly, testing his words as if expecting that they would be thrown back into his face. I'm sorry I never said anything. His uncle immediately reached out towards him with his other hand, forcing Harry to turn back towards him before reaching up, his hand caressing Harry's cheek. Not matter what, you're still my nephew, his uncle countered calmly. It doesn't matter who you were or what you kept from me, your aunt and your parents. For a moment Harry actually looked his uncle in the eyes, then his fists clenched and he turned his head to the side. A lot, he admitted. As a child, I didn't remember, but when I did, I didn't want to lose you, you and Tante Perenelle, and Maman and Papa. I know, his uncle agreed. I remember you were ready to give us up, because you were different, but you definitely weren't ready to give up naming us your relations. Harry rubbed his face again. Back then, he said slowly, Peverell said I inherited memories. His uncle nodded slowly. It weren't just inherited memories, Harry continued, not looking at his uncle. Before I was reborn as Maman and Papa's son, I lived them. They were my life. The man I told you was my father. He was born over 1,000 years before you met me. I remember you said something like that back then, his uncle agreed, but Harry shook his head. I lied to you back then, he countered truthfully. I told you he lived for over 1,000 years. But while that is true, it's only the time frame he lived with me as his son. I met him when he looked to be in his 30s. I have actually no idea how old he really was back then. You met him, his uncle repeated slowly, and Harry sighed. The time travel, it happened back then, didn't it? Your father, he was the man who found you after you traveled back in time. Yes, Harry agreed, not willing to lie any further. For a moment his uncle was silent, then he asked calmly, What does that have to do with my acquaintance? Harry pressed his lips together, but something in his expression must have given him away, because there was a sudden, grim understanding in his uncle's eyes. You came from this time, he concluded. This is the time you were born in. Harry's fists tightened. I should be 15, he finally whispered. I should be a child, a boy, who was tested by his headmaster time and time again. He closed his eyes, grimacing, his face full of bitter regret. The awakening of the Dark Lord of this time in my 4th year of school, he elaborated through clenched teeth. An absent godfather, locked away in prison for something he didn't do in my 3rd, my grandmother, a basilisk in my 2nd, and the Philosopher's Stone destroyed in my 1st year. Ah, his uncle said softly. Albus. For a moment there was silence between them, before his uncle's face changed from thoughtful to angry. Those instances, most likely staged by Dumbledore or used to his advantage. Harry interrupted him and pinched his nose. I can't tell which, but it's been millennia. My fury for those was spent. Well, mine isn't, his uncle replied calmly, but Harry knew that beneath that calm a storm was brewing. A child, you were a child, and he did what he seems to have always done, Harry calmly replied, stopping his uncle mid-rant. He did it before, Grindelwald, my people. We fought against him. We lost people against him, and then came Dumbledore and he just Harry gritted his teeth. My godson died, he finally managed to finish. My godson died, and his son, and his wife. Dumbledore ignored my godson's sacrifice. He ignored the Black's sacrifice. Harry shook his head, unable to continue. I can't let him retain the power he has, he finished, and his uncle reached out to envelop him into a hug. I can't. I just can't let him continue like he has. There's something went wrong with the ritual I did on Halloween, and I will pay the price in a few months for it. But until then, I will at least try to save the magical world. His uncle's fingers carded through his hair. Save it from what? He asked, concerned. Harry sighed and buried his head in his uncle's shoulder. From itself, he admitted. The magical people, they're forgetting where they came from. And that's dangerous. It happened once before, back then when Hogwarts was founded. People forgetting where their magic came from, where they came from. It's not good. If it continues, it will just ensure that we might end up losing our magic in the end. His uncle stopped his caress. How so? He asked, a bit surprised. The Muggle-borns, Harry elaborated. They're either the children of squibs or the children of furbolgs, creatures. They strengthen the magic inherited by us. If we lose them, then we will end up breeding out our magic in the end as well. It's basic inheritance. And people don't remember, his uncle concluded. Harry sighed. It's always something, he agreed. Last time they feared the purebloods, the creatures, now they fear both, creature and Muggle-born. It will turn into their ruin if it continues. But with the newest Dark Lords, if we're unlucky, they might end up pulling the creatures and the Muggle-borns down with them. His uncle sighed. What a vicious cycle, he said. Harry didn't reply. Instead, he let himself be held. It felt safe. His uncle just tightened his embrace when Harry didn't say anything. So, you go and take over the Wizengamot to stop what has been happening, he finally concluded, and to stop Albus, who is partly responsible for the decline and partly responsible for other things you abhor him for. Harry nodded, his head still buried in his uncle's shoulder. And you want me to stand by your side while you fear at that same time that I won't, his uncle added. He's your friend, came Harry's muffled reply at that. And you're my nephew, descendant and heir, his uncle countered. I might have befriended Albus, but unlike him, I love you unconditionally. You're my nephew. By Medin, you're my child. I've watched over you for centuries, loved you for centuries. No matter how much I like Albus, it's not even a tiny amount compared to what I feel for you. Harry's hands fisted into his uncle's clothes at those words. His uncle caressed his hair again. But you knew that, he added. Or at least you suspected it, because otherwise you wouldn't have contacted me at all. Harry closed his eyes. You're my godfather, he replied. I've trusted you since I was little. No matter how much I feared that you might end up choosing Dumbledore's side, I still could not trust you. His uncle hummed at that. So later the Wizengamot, he said softly. I'm here, and I'm willing to stay at your side, but you and I know that my days are numbered. Harry's arms tightened around his uncle. Again a hand caressed his hair while silence descended upon them. A phoenix reborn, huh? His uncle finally said 10 minutes later. Maybe it's time that more than one phoenix returns out of its ashes. At that his godson actually looked up surprised. You want to? It's time, his uncle countered. Like I said, my days are numbered, but if it's done right today, then some things won't die with me. The day was bright, the people were cheerful, and in more than one shop was a radio to ensure that the customers could listen to the first meeting of the Wizengamot in the new year. And just because of the Wizengamot, Diagon Alley was brimming with people. After all, it was tradition to go to Diagon Alley and listen to the first meeting of the Wizengamot, that one meeting in the year where everybody attended and where the new faces would be introduced. It was one of the most important dates in the year, and one of the dates that saw the most people on the streets as well. So, having a tall, pale man with dark hair wandering down the streets hand in hand with a teenage girl wasn't that unusual for a day like that. There were far more unusual people on the streets that day, after all. It didn't even astonish people that those two didn't seem to look for a place in a shop with a radio. Instead, those two seemed to stop at random places in the alley where they crouched down to look at something. If somebody would have taken notice and would have seen old Ollivander's furbishing in the summer, they might have taken notice that the old wand maker had stopped at the same places of the alley one time. But, let's be honest, who remembered the exact odd actions one single man had done once when the action alone was enough to gossip for days? And so nobody watched those two, or wondered about them. You are aware that Mr. Riddle might come for you now that you left him, the blonde-haired girl remarked in that moment, her gaze seeming to look through the wall she was inspecting. Ah, of course, the tall, pale man agreed and then waved it off. But honestly, I think that he's far too obsessed with his original plans to change them so much, or even go and abandon them for me. The girl hummed, half in agreement, half in contemplation. So, he's going to do what, my immortal? She asked. Anastasia Sanguini shrugged. I talked with Pater over Christmas, he said, sounding unconcerned. He thinks that the Dark Lord will speed up his plans now that he fears to be found out or outed. For a moment, the vampire looked upwards towards the sky. Honestly, he said, I think Pater's right. I even went and ensured that he's been left another present. At that, his gaze turned thoughtful. I wonder if he'll like it. The girl next to him threw him an amused look before humming again. Most likely not, she said, sounding a bit sad at that exclamation. I fear he doesn't have the same sense for good presents that you do, my immortal. The vampire sighed. How true, little moon, he agreed sadly, before his mien brightened somewhat. Pater, on the other hand, definitely liked my present, and I doubt he'd hate the one I left for my former employer. He even allowed me to take the ingredients for it when I left this morning to leave it at a place my former employer will definitely find it. Luna Lovegood hummed again at that. Does your father know that you went to the ministry? She asked. For a moment Anna looked quite thoughtful, then he shrugged. He prohibited me from coming with him to the Wizengamot, he pointed out. He didn't ask me to stay away from the ministry totally today. And look at me, the Wizengamot's starting, and I, well-behaved as I am nowhere near the Wizengamot. And you don't think that your present in the ministry for Mr. Riddle won't bring chaos? Luna asked dreamily. The vampire smirked. I was never told not to find a way to ensure chaos spreads, just that I should stay away so that I don't spread chaos in my wake. Luna returned the grin. Then she stopped and looked past the vampire towards a black-clad man walking down the streets. Huh, she said. Guess that's our cue. The vampire turned to look where she had been looking. Ah, he exclaimed, my nephew. I wonder what he's doing here, with the Wizengamot on the way and all that. I thought he'd attend today. Luna hummed, but this time it sounded more like a melody than an answer to the vampire's exclamation. Anna shot her an amused look. How true, he agreed. Something wicked this way comes, and this time around Mr. Riddle might be the one who sent it, Luna agreed before starting to hum once more. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble, she hummed amused. Double, double, toil and trouble, something wicked this way comes. Albus Dumbledore stood silently at the entrance of the Wizengamot chamber, watching. There had been rumors over the last few months, and now, watching the crowd, Albus could tell that there might be something true about them. I heard that Flamel's giving up his seat, Alastor had commented just a few days ago. Heard it's the last act before his life comes to an end. The rumors that he's going to name an heir in January's Wizengamot meeting, that had actually stumped Albus. He had known that all of Flamel's children had long since died, and he had also known that every single line of the children had ended either as a squib line or without issue. There should be no one Nicholas Flamel should be able to give his line to. The Flamel line would end with Nicholas, so who was there, who could inherit? It had been a thought that hadn't let Albus go. He knew that if a line ended, it was possible to name an heir that originally didn't belong to it, but who would Nicholas know to name? The only one that Nicholas knew better than just by name would be Albus, and he didn't dare to hope what that would mean. He dismissed that thought, just like he had done since he heard that rumor. Just because Nicholas would come to the Wizengamot didn't mean that he would give up his seat. Just because Albus was the only close friend who was also vaguely related, they both could trace back their ancestry to Godric Gryffindor, didn't mean that Albus would be the new heir of Flame. There could be other reasons why he decided to return to politics, Albus reminded himself. He doesn't have to give up his seat, and even if he wants to, it doesn't mean that he needs to name an heir. He could declare it dormant, or even end it if he really wants to. Both other options weren't done often, but they still existed, after all. That thought brought Albus to another problem that might occur in this Wizengamot meeting. Sirius will also be there, he thought, and he might end up naming an heir as well. It was another concerning thought. While Sirius didn't have any other relation in his direct line, there were several other potential candidates. There was Nymphadora Tonks, Draco Malfoy, and of course Harry. With Sirius's link to the Potters, Albus suspected that he would name Harry. On one hand, Albus agreed with that possible decision. Draco Malfoy, even with his parents dead, was still too influenced by Tom Riddle to keep the Black House away from Voldemort's grasp, and Nymphadora, for all her black blood, would be a very bad choice considering that she wasn't officially part of the Black family. While that could be changed easily, there would always be the fact that her mother broke the rules and was banned from her birthhouse, besmirching her reputation. It would ensure that the Black House would lose clout with her as an heir. Maybe, Albus thought with a sigh, I can talk to Sirius after today. If he really chooses Harry like I think he will, I should ensure that he'd keep the poor boy away from it right now. Harry has already enough on his plate without adding politics to it. Albus knew that as long as Voldemort was after Harry, the poor boy had more important things to worry about than his own seat in the Wizengamot, or anybody else's seat for that matter. He sighed to himself. At least until he's 17, he told himself, and then sighed again. Oh, Albus knew that normally an heir to a house without a lord should attend the Wizengamot in the January meeting after he turned 15 for the first time, but he thought that people would understand that Harry wouldn't. Albus, at least, planned to tell them that Harry wasn't yet ready to take over his house, and that Albus would keep being proxy until that time. It was for the best. After all, if the poor boy had time to find his own way in life before he was pressured into the, thanks to Voldemort, less important positions that his parents left him with. Xenophilius Lovegood was standing at another entrance to the Wizengamot meeting hall, his father-in-law next to him. I'm surprised you're here, Zeno, the older man said. Zeno just shrugged. I guess I decided to have a successful but very short career in politics. After all, he said, sounding unconcerned. When his father-in-law raised an eyebrow at that, Zeno shrugged again. My daughter, your grandchild, badgered me into it, he elaborated with a sigh. She said that she found out that the Potter's seat has been used by the former headmaster of Hogwarts for the last 14 years. And as much as I hate politics, I couldn't let that stand. Ah, there was calmness in his father-in-law's voice when he followed Zeno's reasoning. So you went and declared yourself proxy by right of marriage, even if said marriage happened a few hundred years ago. That, and I voted for Dumbledore's removal from Hogwarts, Zeno agreed, unconcerned. Not that it meant anything considering that the Wizengamot has no right to decide on the headmaster of Hogwarts and all that. He shrugged. I guess I did it mostly to be able to spite Dumbledore today, he said, feeling a bit vindictive. He's been using a seat not rightfully his after all for the last 14 years. I think taking it from him by a relation that's as obscure as ours is just the right punishment for him. His father-in-law narrowed his eyes at that. You've been reading my old letters home again, have you? He asked. The one I sent home to my family when I was a lad and fighting Grindelwald. Zeno just looked at his father-in-law innocently. I stumbled upon them recently while I was looking for things of my wife for Luna. Why? Because the last time you did the same, Pandora had to stop you from sending prank mail to Albus, his father-in-law countered calmly before shaking his head. Why do you even care? It's not as if it was because I married into this family, and I'll be damned if I don't accept the woes of this family as my own if I belong to it. For a moment, his father-in-law scrutinized Zeno, then he sighed. I guess I should have warned Pandora that marrying a Lovegood was a bad idea, he said, his eyes still on Zeno. Lovegoods have always been odd. Combining that with our family, well, I guess I understand how my grandchild turned out the most unusual person I ever met, and that says something if two of the other persons have been Newt Scamander and Marius Black. Zeno's father-in-law shook his head again. Oh well, he said with a sigh. I guess I'm too late for that, far, far too late. Zeno just shrugged, feeling a bit smug. I guess, he agreed, and then took a deep breath. You coming? He asked his father-in-law. Said man shook his head. There's still somebody I want to go and see first, he said. Zeno nodded. I'll see you later then, he agreed, and with a wave he left his father-in-law behind to step into the Wizengamot chamber. It was time. One last time for politics for this old, tired Lovegood. Neville stood silently next to his grandmother, watching the comings and goings of the already arrived Wizengamot members. Are you ready? His grandmother asked him, and Neville sighed, his eyes tracking people here and there. I have to be, Gran, he told her truthfully. I need to enter the Wizengamot today. It was the truth, a truth Neville had known since he was a small child. He was heir. His parents were unable to fulfill their role, and while his father wasn't dead and therefore Neville theoretically wasn't forced to enter the Wizengamot after his 15th birthday, to ensure that the political clout of his house wouldn't diminish, it was also true that his father was as good as dead, and if Neville didn't enter, his house would lose clout, theoretical allowance to stay away or not. At least, Neville would only be forced to attend this one meeting. After he would hand over control formally to his proxy, his grandmother, and return to his life as a normal schoolboy until he was finished with Hogwarts. His grandmother looked at him, her eyes scrutinizing him, but unlike in the past, there was no disappointment in her face. You've grown, she noticed. Your father would have been proud. Neville looked at his grandmother in light surprise. Thank you, Gran, he finally said before his gaze returned to the crowd in front of him. I fear I might need all maturity I have, today. His grandmother nodded, her face grave. Change is in the air, she agreed, and with us leaving the light today there might be repercussions. Neville knew she was right, but he also knew that it might be less terrible than they thought at the moment. The Longbottoms, while allied with a few houses of the light, like the Potters, had never had that many connections and alliances. Joining the Grand family would just help them in their political standing, even if it came with a change of fraction. There's going to be a lot of upheaval today, he agreed with her. There might be people who will try to influence us in our decision. Too true, his grandmother replied before she sent him an amused look. But that's the reason why we've been approached before today. We had time to think about it. So today, we can declare our standing without needing time to take a closer look at the offer. Neville nodded slowly. People might be unhappy with what we're about to do, he said slowly. But if we did it right, we won't lose our allies, or most of them, after we declare ourselves. Maybe it was a bit naive of Neville to feel optimistic, but on the other hand, he and his grandmother had done everything they could to keep what little alliances they had, so maybe they weren't that naive to hope it had been enough. Neville took one last deep breath. Let's do this, he said, trying to calm his nerves. Then he held out an arm to his grandmother, and together they entered the chamber to take their place in the crowd. It was time. Severus was definitely unhappy. He remembered quite well that he had gone and promised Sal that he would attend the Wizengamot meeting, and yet before he could, he had ended up being called to the Dark Lord's side, and then sent out with some others to conduct a raid in Diagon Alley. A raid that should end in the death of one annoying vampire. Of course, with Severus's current luck, he had been the one to run into the searched-for vampire straight away. Said vampire, on the other hand, didn't seem bothered at all by Severus's get-up. Sevi, he greeted Severus cheerfully. Shouldn't you be at the Wizengamot? Severus had expected a lot when they were called to the raid, but meeting the mad vampire, and not alone, but with a person, Severus actually knew, definitely wasn't it. Severus stared at the vampire and his shadow next to him. Miss Lovegood, he said, and looked at the girl. Care to explain what you're doing here in Diagon Alley? I promised a papa to watch his shop, Professor, the girl replied, totally unconcerned that there were Death Eaters up and down the street all about to bring hell down on the alley. I'll have to stay here for another 10 minutes at least. Severus stared at the girl. She had to stay here for at least another 10 minutes. Did she really think that the Death Eaters cared about her grandfather's shop's closing time or lunchtime, considering the current time? This is a raid, Miss Lovegood. I'm sure your grandfather would understand if you abandoned his shop for the sake of your life. Severus tried to make the girl understand. He had to get her out of the alley before some of his colleagues noticed that he not only had found the vampire but also an easy target. Sadly, the girl was stubborn. She shook her head, planting her feet on the ground next to the mad vampire. I fear that is impossible, sir, she objected. 9 minutes and no less now. 9 minutes? Severus frowned at the young Ravenclaw and wondered if the girl was even more insane than he had thought she was. The girl nodded slowly. Of course, 9 minutes, she agreed. We've been talking for 1 already, soon to be 2. In another few seconds I'll be able to go in 8 minutes. Severus pinched his nose. Your damn agreement with your grandfather doesn't matter right now, Miss Lovegood, he finally growled. Get out of here, now. Don't you think it's rude to demand something like that? The vampire next to the girl inquired. This is a public alley, after all. That doesn't matter, Vin. Uncle Anna, the vampire interrupted him, his eyes narrowing. Severus gave in. Uncle Anna, he repeated, hoping to get them going faster. The Dark Lord ordered a raid in the alley, and he ordered your head on a silver platter, so get out, both of you. The vampire seemed to be a bit disturbed by Severus's last words. I doubt my head would look good on a silver platter, he said, sounding a bit grossed out. Gold, maybe, but silver. I think that wouldn't fit with my eye color at all. Severus stared at the vampire, opened his mouth, and then closed it again with a snap. Insane. That damn vampire was totally insane. The girl next to the vampire hummed at that comment. It took a moment for Severus to actually notice that it wasn't just a hymn of agreement, but actually some kind of song she was humming. As if she noticed his attention on her, she looked up at him with her dreamy eyes and smiled. Something wicked this way comes, she whispered. In that moment, several other Death Eaters noticed whom Severus had found. Ah, you have him, McNair commented, pulling his wand, clearly about to start cursing. Lovegood hummed some more, clearly not bothered, while one by one Death Eaters started to surround them. 7 minutes, she said, her pale eyes on the Death Eaters. The vampire grinned, his teeth lengthening and a wicked look in his eyes. Good, he said. I wonder how good they actually are. The last time, their ability to hit the target was still atrocious. The girl hummed. It's been a bit more than a week, she commented. I doubt they're that much better now. The vampire nodded gravely before ducking beneath the first spells flying at him. How true, he agreed. Lovegood also ducked, twisted, and took shelter behind the vampire. From there, safely hidden away, she removed her attention from the upstarting battlefield. Instead, her eyes turned towards Severus. You should go now, she said to him calmly, as if they weren't currently surrounded by Death Eaters. This doesn't concern you, and I'm sure that the Eternal Prince is waiting for you. Severus stared at her. Oddly enough, it wasn't her confidence, but her words that kept him in place. The Eternal Prince? He repeated. Lovegood shrugged. I think you normally call him Potter, Professor, she answered, and then pulled out her wand to flick it at one of the Death Eaters surrounding them. He went down vomiting some kind of rainbow-colored slosh. Severus grimaced at the display, while the vampire cheered. Nice one, little moon. Then Severus registered what Lovegood had said. He narrowed his eyes at the Lovegood. The Eternal Prince, he repeated. Why do you call him that? Because no matter what else that girl said, he knew that the Eternal Prince was a title she must have bestowed upon Potter. Lovegood crooked her head while looking at him thoughtfully, after hitting another Death Eater with a bright orange-colored spell that Severus refused to follow with his eyes. He didn't even want to know what a spell that color did. Because that's who he is, Lovegood countered, unbothered by the Death Eater reaching for her. Instead of using her wand, she kicked him in the sheen before the vampire downed him with a precise hit in the diaphragm. Severus willfully ignored the other Death Eaters being downed left, right, and center all around him by the two people in front of him. After all his time with Uncle Anna, he was actually getting good at ignoring things he didn't want to see. Not Potter? Or Harry? Severus asked and stepped aside before one of his colleagues could fall over him. There was distaste in his voice that he couldn't hide when he mentioned the boy's former name. Lovegood blinked dreamily. Next to her, a Death Eater was thrown backwards after being grabbed in the scruff by the vampire. It's not his name, Lovegood countered, unbothered that a Death Eater had nearly reached her. Neither one is, so why should I use it? You're using the Eternal Prince, Severus pointed out, and took another step aside to let one of the Death Eaters behind him pass. This one was ducked by the vampire and then thrown over said vampire's back at another Death Eater who had been about to attack Lovegood from behind. Severus did everything he could to ignore that red substance he was sure was blood landing on the street. There was a silver gleam in the vampire's hand for a moment, and for just a second Severus wondered if Uncle Anna had brought a knife to a wand fight. He forcefully ejected that thought before it could take a hold in his brain. It's a title, Lovegood replied unbothered in that moment to Severus's question, and it's the truth, so why shouldn't I use it? A good question. I can't remember Potter ever saying that he was a prince, Severus countered coolly, trying to be rational in the face of insanity. You wouldn't, the vampire spoke up amused before finally drawing a wand. No, he drew a stone and threw it at 3 Death Eaters. The stone flashed and the next moment 3 Death Eaters were enveloped in a kind of ward. Their spells rebounced and hit them instead of the 2 people they had been aimed at. Pater wouldn't say anything like that. He's reluctant to claim what is rightfully his. Severus stared at the newly downed Death Eaters, not even able to comment on the facts that the vampire had just thrown in his face. The vampire followed his gaze. Modified ward, he told Severus, clearly unbothered by Severus's gawking. Written on a sardonyx. I've been playing with gems like that for a few hundred years, and the blacks, well, they just enhanced it. They're useful, at least in a moderate way. 2 minutes now, Lovegood said in that moment, her attention on the other Death Eaters who tried to enter the shops. There were a lot of panicking people on the street, but right now most of the Death Eaters were preoccupied with the vampire and, by default, Miss Lovegood. Severus knew it wouldn't last. He knew his colleagues. The moment they noticed that neither the vampire nor Lovegood would be overcome easily, a lot of them would change their attention to the people surrounding them. It would be a slaughter. It always was, especially with the anti-apparition words that had already been brought up surrounding the alley before the Death Eaters had even started their raid, and panicky as the people were, most of them didn't even think to use another way to flee. Severus hated it, but as long as he was a spy, he also couldn't do anything against it. You should go now, Professor, Lovegood said in that moment. Yes, you should, the vampire agreed. Pater is waiting for you. You shouldn't leave him waiting. Before Severus could reply or even think about replying, something changed in the air. There was a sudden, pressure-like feeling coming down on them. Lovegood looked up, ignoring the spell that came sailing just over her head. She said interestedly. I guess it's time. The way she said it made a shiver run down Severus's back. The answering mad grin from the vampire next to her didn't help at all. I guess it's a good thing that your papa knew he needed to be done until Christmas, then, Uncle Anna replied. Severus shivered again, and then hell broke loose. Emilia was standing at the entrance to the Wizengamot. Her eyes searched the crowd. Are you still up for it? A voice behind her asked her suddenly. She turned. Ollivander, she greeted him, eyeing him now instead of the crowd. So you came. Of course, Ollivander agreed. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Emilia raised her eyebrow. I somehow get the feeling that you know more than I do when it comes to the happenings today, she commented dryly. Ollivander sent her an unrepentant smile. Just guesswork, he told her, clearly amused. Just a bit of guesswork and a hunch or two on my part. Emilia watched his calm face while he said those words. Anything you can share? She asked with a frown. He just smiled at her. Plenty of things, he agreed, but a lot of them will most likely come out in the open. Amelia frowned at that confession. That's not sharing anything at all, she pointed out. Ollivander thought about it, his eyes drifting over the crowd. The Greengrass and the Zabinis have a new alliance, I heard, he finally said slowly. The Longbottoms have been approached by the Blacks, and Malfoy will return today. Amelia raised an eyebrow at the last. Malfoy? She repeated. The actual lord of the house, Ollivander elaborated. The Malfoys are just the proxy of this seat. That actually hadn't been something Amelia had known. Oh, she said slowly. So Malfoy. He's an ally of ours, Ollivander immediately answered. He's been one since I was a child, and even longer. You know him, then? Amelia asked. It would be good to know if they had an ally in Malfoy that Ollivander actually trusted. He led the resistance against Grindelwald, the old man replied. He was my commander, my leader, the one I learned from and the one I trusted the most. He's back now, back again, and he asked me to be back at his side. He's the reason why I approached you. Amelia guessed that that answer was good enough when it came to trust. Our side then, she said, like the Longbottoms. And the Blacks if the Longbottoms accepted, Ollivander countered smugly. And some other people as well. Today houses will be reborn, remade, and maybe even remembered. It's time. Everything changes, and today it will be the Wizengamot. Amelia closed her eyes and smiled at that. Hopefully it will be a good change, she said. The best, Ollivander countered, and he sounded so sure that Amelia couldn't help but smile a bit more. She took a deep breath. Good then, she declared. Let's do this. Let's change everything, even if the prospect sounded a bit overwhelming to her. Nevertheless, she took another deep breath and then stepped forward into the chamber. It was time, and she would do her best to get the optimal outcome in the end. While everybody was watching the gathering of the Wizengamot, Tom Marvolo Riddle, also known as Lord Voldemort, slipped into the ministry. It was time. Today, he would go and take the prophecy. Oh, it was a risk, going himself, but the risk was worth it. He still had a chance to bring his plans to fruition, and he would take it. Next to him, Bellatrix Lestrange, born no name, was walking. She was still shaken from being thrown out of her birth family, but determined to follow her lord's orders. It was easy for them to get into the ministry unnoticed. Everybody had their attention on the upcoming meeting of the Wizengamot, so slipping into the building was easier than breathing. The way down to the Hall of Prophecies was easily found as well. There might be a guard, Bella reminded her master when they entered, but the hall was empty. The spell Voldemort did to ensure that they were alone didn't come back with any signs of life. Voldemort frowned. Nagini should be here, he mumbled to himself, suddenly feeling dread pooling in his stomach. He dismissed it forcefully. Maybe she had slithered out to get some mice. He clung to that thought until they rounded the shelf that contained the prophecy he was after. The next moment, Lord Voldemort lost control over his magic when his fury lashed out. The shelves shook. Some prophecies even rolled of the shelves and burst. There, nailed to the shelf, next to the prophecy Voldemort was after, was Nagini. She was lifeless, clearly dead for more than a few days, and just looking like she had just died thanks to a preservation spell cast on her. Next to her was pinned a message. Best regards. Sanguine, it read. Reading the words, the last of Voldemort's control slipped. His fury unleashed. The shelves creaked and rattled. Some more prophecies fell of them, and then the wards were triggered and an alarm sounded. Voldemort cursed and grabbed the prophecy. It didn't matter. The people had been preoccupied with the Wizengamot meeting and the raid he had sent to Diagon Alley. They would need their time to get there. And until then, nobody was there to stop Voldemort from getting what he had wanted in the first place. The damn prophecy spoken all those years ago about him and the Potter boy. The Wizengamot was a crescendo of different voices. People were clustered in every corner, none of them at their seats, yet, "You know that from today onwards there will be no way back," Nicholas Flamel said, and stepped up next to a man he had known as his nephew for more years than he could count. "I'm aware," the other replied, his eyes on the crowd. "Salvatio," Nicholas said, searching the other man's gaze. "You and I both know you'll have a choice today. There's just one part that will be able to live from today onwards. either Harry James Potter or Salvatio Malfoy, or whatever you're calling yourself now." For a moment Harry was silent, his eyes escaping his uncle's gaze to watch the crowd some more. Then he sighed. "Emrys," he corrected. "It's basically always been Emrys." For a moment he returned to silence, then he corrected himself with a grimace. "Well, actually it should be Grim or LeFay, because those names were really always mine, but—" He hesitated, before continuing slowly. "Emrys, that's the name I always saw as mine." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter anymore. A name is a name. Nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't actually define me." His uncle next to him hummed. "This day is going into history," he finally said. "I can see it already." Harry threw his uncle an amused look. "If you say so," he agreed. "I guess it's on us to ensure that you're right in the end." With that they both straightened one last time before they stepped into the chamber. It was time. Albus Dumbledore entered the meeting room of the Wizengamot and looked around. People he had known for decades were gathered around the room. Albus sighed. At the moment only those Albus knew were gathered, but soon the new lords would join them after they had sworn themselves to the Wizengamot in front of the gathered other lords and ladies. For a moment Albus looked around, his gaze searching those that were missing. Augusta Longbottom wasn't there, and Albus knew what that meant. He sighed internally. In his opinion, Neville Longbottom and the other heirs who would join the Wizengamot today were far too young to dabble in politics. But sadly Albus had no say in their joining. His gaze travelled further through the crowd. Some of the lords and ladies were still gathered at the bottom of the chamber, others had already taken their seats and were talking with their neighbours. And then he saw somebody he hadn't expected to see at all. Malfoy. Lucius Malfoy. Albus stared at the man. He should be dead, he thought, feeling a bit thrown. Voldemort, my own intelligence, everything said that he died. And yet, Malfoy was there. Lucius Malfoy was there, and from the looks of it, Albus wasn't the only one who was thrown by it. More than one person threw a look or two at the Malfoy lord. Albus took a deep breath and forced himself to ignore it. Instead, he returned to looking over the crowd, deliberately ignoring the corner the Malfoy lord was standing in. While he watched the crowd, his mind returned to the last time he had been in this chamber, back when Harry had been there and defended himself. And with that thought he remembered the questions he had had back then, questions he had dismissed back then and wasn't willing to think about it even now. He knew that Moody had thought that Harry was an imposter. But Albus had always been sure that he knew better, and not only because of what he had gathered from the day Harry had defended himself in the Wizengamot. Instead, Albus was sure that Harry had been possessed by Voldemort on and off over the whole last 6 months. Albus's reasoning was easy. The boy, while different, was still too much Harry, knew too much that only Harry knew, and, the most important thing, the boy could do a Patronus that he had been shown to produce in his own memory at the trial, and memories couldn't be faked without people seeing that they were faked. It was somehow reassuring that Harry, for all the influence Voldemort had on him, hadn't yet succumbed to the dark. That thought brought back his musings from the trial, and his discussion with Sirius, who hadn't been happy when Albus had talked to him after it. "I thought you were there to defend Harry, but now I heard from others that you simply sat by and watched." The enraged future Lord Black had accused him, and don't tell me it wasn't so. Nymphadora was there as an aura and she let it slip that Harry had to defend himself even though you were there. "I had prepared everything to defend him," Albus countered calmly when Sirius glared at him childishly. But Harry obviously had another idea. Sirius scoffed. "What should he have prepared?" he countered with an eye roll. "He's a child." "He showed them his memories," Albus answered, while foregoing the fact that Harry had also known how to defend himself by using the laws, Voldemort's influence. Albus was sure of that. Of course, the memories Harry had seen came with their own troubles. Harry's Patronus was a stag. Everybody in the Order knew that, and yet the memories showed something different, something that if Alastor had known, he'd had taken as a confirmation of his theory. A phoenix, Albus had mused when he had seen it in the Wizengamot meeting, not a stag. And yet, Albus, while surprised, had seen the change in the Patronus as something else. Of course, Alastor could have been right with his imposter theory, but Albus thought that the Phoenix Patronus had more to do with the fact that Harry had been traumatized just a few months before. Voldemort forced him to watch Cedric die, Albus knew. The Patronus can change through a great emotional upheaval. Watching his classmate die and Voldemort resurrect, that could have been enough. Harry had survived that encounter while Cedric had died, so Albus wasn't too surprised that Harry's Patronus had changed, most likely without the boy actually registering. Most likely Harry might have had no idea that his Patronus had changed until he showed the memory, and even then he might not have noticed, with the stress he was under and the strain of fighting off Voldemort's influence on his mind. Of course, neither of that he had told Sirius back then, and now, after Sirius had turned himself into the new Lord Black, Albus was even less inclined to tell the other man that Harry had been influenced by Voldemort. Sirius, with his sudden inclination for the dark, might have seen it as a way to join the dark fully, after all. Oh, Sirius hadn't said that he would join the dark, but his behavior, the fact that he suddenly used his family magic, Albus wasn't blind. It was only a matter of time now, if at all. Maybe, with the Wizengamot starting, Sirius would give in and leave the light to take over the heritage he had gained from his ancestors. He was too much like his namesake, too much like Phineas Nigellus Black, to refuse the calling of his ancestors' inclination of the dark much longer. Albus mourned the day when the last of the Blacks would fall to the dark. For a moment he closed his eyes in silent grief before he turned his gaze towards the black seat. It was still empty. Sirius wasn't there, yet. It made Albus nervous. What if Sirius had taken Harry with him to announce him as his heir? Albus took a deep breath. No. Sirius had promised him that he wouldn't force politics onto Harry until Harry had found his feet. Albus didn't know what to think of Sirius right now, but he was willing to think that Sirius would keep his promise to him until he thought Harry better prepared. Maybe Albus would have mused on that more, would have tried to plan out how to keep Harry from the Wizengamot until the boy was truly ready and not just ready in Sirius's eyes. But something else stopped him in his track. A seat that should have been empty was occupied. He started, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The Potter seat was occupied. The Potter seat was occupied. It should have been empty. It was Albus' prerogative to vote for the Potters. He was the Potter proxy. So why? He stared at the person in the seat. It took him a moment to understand what he was seeing. It took him another moment to remember who the man was, who was sitting in the seat that belonged to the Potters. Xenophilius Lovegood. Lovegood. A commoner. A man who shouldn't even be there, no matter that his father-in-law was a lord, no matter that his daughter would be a lady one day. Lovegood. Why was Lovegood in the Potter seat? How was he there? It shouldn't have been. Albus was the proxy. Albus clenched his hands to fists. Lovegood was sitting in the Potter seat. And no matter what else was true, for a proxy to take a seat in the seat of a lord's family, the proxy must have a claim to the seat as a proxy. So Lovegood's claim was legal, which also meant that Albus had lost his claim. Albus's hand clenched further. He had lost his claim, and he didn't even know how or when. He hadn't been told, he hadn't known, and Albus didn't understand. He had no idea how he had lost control over the Potter seat without finding out, and he had even less an idea how to change it back so that he had control again. Albus forcefully tried to unclench his fists. He knew that the loss of the Potter seat also meant that he had lost his guardianship over Harry, something that Albus knew he needed even more now with Voldemort back. For a moment, Albus wished that he could go to Fudge and ensure that he'd regain Harry's guardianship, but he also knew that Fudge was far more interested in Albus losing his own seat in the Wizengamot than help him regain control over Harry. Before he could think about it further, somebody interrupted his frantic thought process. Albus. He turned and looked at the man who had stepped up behind him. Alastor, he greeted his friend. The old aura followed Albus's gaze towards the Potter seat. Guess that Lovegood decided that he had to be here today as well, the aura said, as if it was logical that Xenophilius Lovegood was the Potter proxy. Lovegood, Albus finally forced himself to say. This isn't the first time he's there. Proxy, unlike lords, didn't have rituals to take over the seats. They showed their claim by being able to take a seat in the seats and not by swearing themselves to the Wizengamot like the lords. They were proxies, there to keep the seat active when the lord wasn't able to attend or too young, and they always voted in the lord's interest. Albus had been the Potter proxy even though he had never taken a seat in the Potter seat. He had his own seat to sit in. After all, he was there the last time I heard, Alastair said dismissively. Wasn't active before. I wonder why he decided to show up back then and today. It's not as if he cares for politics after all. Albus swallowed. How? How did he claim it? How was Lovegood related to the Potters? Because, as far as Albus knew, only relations could claim a seat if the Wizengamot themselves didn't decide on a proxy. Albus had gained the Potter seat through a Wizengamot decision, so for Lovegood to claim it without another official vote on it meant that Lovegood was related to the Potters. Alastair shrugged. Something about a distant aunt marrying in the Potter line, he said. As far as I know, his claim is ridiculous, but for whatever reason, the seat accepted his claim, so here he is. Which didn't bode well for Albus at all, because for such a distant relation to be accepted above Albus, it was basically an indirect indication that Albus had been going against the wishes of the current heir Potter, which again was an indication that Harry might be losing his fight against Voldemort's influence. Albus shuddered. Before he could think further about it, the Wizengamot was called into session and he was forced to take a seat. There was nothing Albus could do right now. Whatever he did, it would have to wait until after the first meeting in January. Stepping into the Wizengamot chamber was nerve-wracking for Neville. Yes, he had known it would happen. Yes, he had his gran at his side. But that didn't matter. Keeping calm and collected took basically everything out of him. Nevertheless, his hands shook when he stepped up into the line of those who would claim their seats today. Neville guessed that he should be thankful that he wasn't the only one claiming today. He was a mess already. It would have been worse if he had ended up waiting for the introduction alone. Then, the meeting started. It was the usual introduction, an announcement that this was the first meeting of the new year, before Amelia Bones went on and told the hall that the claimants for the seats would start their claim now. Zabini, as one of the youngest, was the first family called. Neville watched his schoolmate step forward and couldn't help but wonder if the other boy was as nervous as Neville. "Step forward, heir, and state your claim," Amelia Bones said, who was not only leading the Wizengamot that day but also the introduction of the new lords. Blaise Zabini stepped to the front of the platform. Neville couldn't help but feel a bit envious when he noticed that Blaise's hands didn't shake at all when he placed them on the obsidian obelisk in the middle of the platform. Neville remembered what it was. The Stone of Judgment. Enhanced by Merlin himself, and also the stone King Arthur had drawn Excalibur from. This stone knew every family, could trace the lines, and only it could decide through the magic woven into it if the title the person was trying to claim was theirs to claim. "I am Blaise Basilius Adrian Zabini," the Zabini heir said. "I am heir to my line." Everyone in the Wizengamot knew these words. It was a traditional form to state the claim to a house, and had to be formulated like that whenever a new lord took over. "I call forth the lordship I carry. I am Lord Zabini, as I was born to my father, who was the last Lord Zabini." Soft light began to glow around the boy, and a crest, his family crest, appeared behind him. A sign that the boy had stated the truth and was also acknowledged from the chamber itself as the rightful heir to his line. "So be it, so mote it be." The boy ended and the crest lit up behind him before the light entered his body. "So mote it be," Amelia said. "Welcome, Lord Zabini. Take your seat." And so it kept going. Albus couldn't help but feel nervous when the first heir stepped up and claimed his position. Zabini, a boy Albus had long since seen as a lost cause. There was no chance that Zabini would be anything but part of the dark section. He didn't know who he expected next, but it definitely wasn't Minerva. The old witch threw him a dark look when she stepped up and claimed her seat. There was silence when McGonagall entered their ranks, and Albus knew why. Everybody had known that Minerva's father was a Muggle, and yet she had a seat that she inherited from her father's line. Albus clenched his fists again. It was something he had never wanted Minerva to find out. The McGonagalls had been magical once, something that Albus had found out by chance, but their allies. Albus shook his head. Black, Slytherin. Prince, Lefay, Emrys. No, Minerva, in Albus's eyes, would have been better off without taking her seat. Sadly, the witch hadn't come to him and had instead decided to come here by herself to claim something that wasn't worth claiming. It would just throw her to the sharks, because alliances weren't so easy to change, especially not without talking the change through with the lords you were allied with before announcing it in the Wizengamot. If you didn't, it was easy to end up in a blood feud, and that had been something Albus would have liked to protect his colleague from. But before he could muse how to help her, another person stepped up. Sirius. He, unlike Minerva and Zabini, was already lord of his line. Instead, he looked over the other lords before reaching for the Stone of Judgment. I am Sirius Orion Black, he announced, looking around the others. I am lord of my line. The obelisk lit up. For my house, I call an heir today, Sirius added, of blood, of magic, of worth. Albus pressed his lips together. Hopefully, Sirius had decided against Harry. Albus prayed that Sirius hadn't decided for Harry. I call a black to me, Sirius said. I call a sibling as my heir. Murmurs could be heard throughout the chamber. Albus frowned. Sibling? Sirius didn't have any siblings, well, not anymore. No. Stop. There was Christmas. There was the man Albus had seen shortly, the man who had looked just like, I call Regulus Arcturus Black as my heir, and with that, another person stepped up and reached for the obelisk, his hand touching Sirius's. And Albus, for all that he hadn't seen the other man clearly for over 10 years, recognized him nevertheless, just like he had while the man had been standing in the shadows at Christmas. A man that couldn't have been real. Something Albus had convinced himself of after their first interaction. He had dismissed it as an illusion, as a play of light or a spell cast to confuse him. He had blamed the vampire for it. And even if it had been real, Albus knew about the animosity between Sirius and his family, and while Sirius had changed, Albus still had believed that Sirius hadn't changed enough to choose the other man. If an heir, Albus had expected Sirius to choose Harry's sibling or no sibling. But then, Albus had also been sure that the sibling had been something the vampire had created with illusions, something to discountenance him. And yet, here was the evidence that Albus had been wrong and that the man had been real. He was there, standing right next to Sirius. Regulus, the boy who should have been dead, killed by Voldemort. Regulus thought that brat died years ago, Alastair next to him commented, sounding oddly unbothered that Sirius had just named a Death Eater as his heir. And Albus? Albus wondered if he should have been content with Harry as Sirius' heir instead, if the alternative was Regulus Black. Sadly, before he could think about it more, Neville Longbottom stepped up and claimed his seat, just to declare his grandmother proxy in the next moment. Albus expected Neville to be the last, but instead another known person stepped up to the obelisk. Harry was standing in the shadows of the chamber, watching the proceedings with hooded eyes. It was time. His fists clenched. His eyes closed, his lids pressing together, and he could feel the tension running through his veins. For a moment he could see nothing but the stone of judgment and the things it would reveal when it was his turn to step up and stake his claim. Then, unbidden, another memory pressed forward. Tell me why, Em. It had been a simple question. A simple question by a woman Harry had tried to keep away. Hilary, he greeted the woman who still called him uncle up to this day, and who had recognized him no matter that his appearance had changed. Em, she replied, her ghostly eyes searching his features. Tell me why. He sighed. Why, what, Hilary? Why are you trying to avoid me? Why are you keeping me from your plans? Why, Em? And Harry, for all the time he had lived, didn't know how to answer that question. For him it had never even been a consideration. He hadn't wanted his little goddaughter involved, and not even knowing that little Helena Lily Ravenclaw was fully grown and dead had changed his desire to keep her away. He sighed. I know you're grown, I know you're dead, but A sudden understanding lit his goddaughter's eyes. "You think you failed me," she said, "when I died, when I quarreled with Mother. You want to protect me." "I went up against Tom Riddle," Harry replied, unable to keep quiet anymore. "I was at school back then," his baby girl immediately countered. "If you'd just asked, I might have been able to help you. Or you might have been forcefully involved into something that would have destroyed you." Harry immediately countered, his eyes looking determined at her, willing her to understand. Tom Riddle might have turned insane over time, but no matter how insane he acts, he was a brilliant head once, and I can't trust that he won't have a time or two when he still is. That actually shut Hillary up for a moment. Then she grimaced. "You fear he'd obliterate me," she said. "You fear he'd go and destroy everything that's left of me, leaving nothing of me, not even my soul." "You said you knew him," Harry countered, his face severe. "So tell me he wouldn't." From the silence that followed, the answer was heard even without words, as clear as day. He would have. And they both knew it. "I loved you when you were a child, Hillary," Harry finally told the silent ghost in front of him. "And I loved you when you were grown and when you died as well. I still love you. Do you really think that I could have gone and asked you for help when you are even more vulnerable than the living right now? Because unlike the living, Hillary could only lose her current being, and that being done with dark magic would mean that her soul would be lost for eternity as well. Ghosts might have been indestructible when it came to normal spells, but the spells that worked on them had catastrophic outcomes for them." "I can't risk it," Harry repeated. He could see understanding in his goddaughter's eyes at that. For a moment she seemed to struggle with herself, then she took a deep breath and nodded. "All right," she agreed, her eyes on him, and clearly struggling to accept his reasoning, yet willing to try anyway. "But if it's not why do you disregard other things that can help you?" That actually stopped Harry in his tracks. "Other things," he repeated, his eyes narrowed. And his goddaughter, his beautiful goddaughter, just looked at him and raised an eyebrow. "I lived for centuries, Aim," she said, as if he should understand what she meant from that fact alone. "I heard things, I saw things." He frowned at her. She returned his frown with one of her own, obviously not happy with his reaction. "Thader's sword," she said, her gaze accusing. "I might not have understood it as a child, but I've had centuries to understand it now." Godric, of course, she would remember the sword he wielded. "Lily," Harry said slowly, not sure how to answer when he wasn't even sure what she wanted from him to begin with, but she interrupted before he could say anything further. "It's Excalibur," she said, no doubt in her voice. "Thader was Lefay, but for whatever reason I can't understand. You, are Pendragon," because of course his precious goddaughter would have to stumble over a secret he had tried to keep as close as possible for longer than she had been alive. His goddaughter gestured around her. "Not only that," she said, "this," her hands gestured again, "is Camelot." There was no accusation in her voice, just knowledge and certainty. Harry closed his eyes, his lips emitting a soft groan. "How?" he whispered, and his goddaughter shrugged. "I used my time wisely and read through every book of the library," she said, as if it was nothing unusual, which it wasn't if you considered that she was a Ravenclaw by blood and house. "There are books there, one of them, it speaks about you. Salvers, Sahar Pendragon, the prince." And of course she'd go and combine spare facts to a working theory. Sometimes Harry wondered if he had done wrong when he supported his goddaughter's fascination with books. "Of course you would find that," he gave in, not willing to lie. She crooked her head at him. "What about Emrys?" she asked. "Were you lying?" Harry shook his head with a sigh. "My mother was of Pendragon's line and Arthur adopted me," he answered. And his goddaughter, his precious goddaughter, looked at him in understanding. "Lily," she said, "you named me after her." Because she knew, because she had always known, and Harry couldn't fault her for approaching his mother if she had, couldn't fault her for understanding. He closed his eyes. "Hillary," he said slowly, "what do you want?" She looked at him thoughtfully. "Why not the throne?" she asked. "Why not forcing them to listen and to obey?" "Because you can't claim the throne without the support of the people," Harry countered, feeling old and tired, and he let go of that thought. There was too much to do to linger on his exhaustion. And I can't guarantee that I will have it when I enter the Wizengamot. But you'd know if you were there, she countered. The throne, if you had it, it would glow. It would call you. Which wasn't a lie. Harry looked at his goddaughter, love in his eyes. I would, he agreed, and then looked away, his eyes searching the future in the walls surrounding them. But claiming it, the throne is a possibility that shouldn't be explored. It would mean something to people I might not be able to fulfill. But it would help, Helily countered. It would ensure that people would have to listen. Harry opened his mouth to object, but his goddaughter wasn't done yet. Leaving it unclaimed could be dangerous, she added, her eyes pleading. If somebody else— There are wards on the throne, Helily, Harry interrupted her calmly. The only one who can claim it is me. I am the heir, and as long as I live, no other heir can be named by anybody else but me. Hilary frowned, clearly intending to object, but Harry wasn't done yet. Those wards on the throne are dangerous, Hilary. They will kill who tried to breach them without a ritual claim. You don't play with wards like that, and people know that, by wind and fire. Even Tom Riddle knows that. Would they kill you as well, Hilary immediately countered. You said it yourself, you're the heir, That's not up for discussion, Harry interrupted her. If I'd go and wanted to claim the throne, I'd do it by ritual and not by simply sitting down on it. You don't play with wards, and no matter if you're bound by them or not, wards like the ones on the throne are deadly. Maybe I'd survive it if I tried to claim the throne without a ritual, but maybe they'd kill me anyway. Heir or no heir. It doesn't matter. No matter how, I won't try to claim the throne. His goddaughter pressed her lips together. Then I'll— And Harry didn't even need her to finish the sentence to know what she wanted to say. I can't lose you, Helily, he countered. I can't involve you, not with what's at stake for you when it comes out. And finally, his goddaughter reluctantly nodded, willing to give in and accept. All right, she said, this time sounding like she actually meant it. All right, but if I keep away, promise me you will find somebody else to help you. And Harry, for all that he didn't want to, did what she demanded. She was his baby girl, and if a promise like that would keep her safe, then he would promise. And he had done as he had promised. He had found help. Regulus, Anastasius, Sirius, the Weasleys, the Longbottoms, Severus. He had found help, had gathered allies to keep his goddaughter away, had conducted a plan to take down his opponents. And now, after all these months, he was here, at the Wizengamot, finally able to do what he had promised himself he would when Alaric Moody had died. Are you all right? Harry turned and looked at his own uncle, just like he had been Helily's once upon a time. I am, uncle, he said, and turned his gaze back to the Wizengamot proceedings. Just remembering. He shook his head with a sigh. It's overwhelming a bit, he confessed. Today, I planned it. I hoped for the best. By wind and fire, I even went so far to bear the brunt of wards that were made for me, yet also made to keep me out to be here. His uncle frowned at that. Care to elaborate? He asked, and Harry shook his head. The wards on Privet Drive, he said, not looking at the other man. It's complicated, and it's done. It's over, and I survived. Leave it rest. For a moment his uncle watched him with a frown. Twisted wards like the ones you described can have consequences, he finally said, clearly not willing to let it go. Erratic behavior. Uncle, let it go, Harry interrupted the other man. It's over and done now, and today it will end. No need to dwell on it. For a moment, it looked as if his uncle wanted to elaborate on it. Nevertheless, but in the end the older-looking man inclined his head slowly and gave in. Instead, he looked back into the chamber. It's our turn now, he said to Harry. Ready? And Harry looked to his uncle with a smile. Ready, he agreed, before he stepped into the chamber on the heels of the current Lord Lefay, Nicholas Flamel. Albus Dumbledore blinked in surprise when the next person stepped up. Oh, he had rumors, so he shouldn't have been surprised, but it had been rumors, nothing else. His friend himself hadn't contacted him and told him that he would be there, so while the rumors existed, Albus hadn't been too sure that they weren't all that existed. Nicholas Flamel. Nicholas Flamel was here. He had expected to be told by Nicholas if the other man really came. Instead, his friend was standing there besides a foreign young man, observing the room with him. Flamel looked old and he had a cane to walk. His hair was white and his fingers shaky. And yet, he was alive. Well, that's a surprise, Alistair said and leaned back. You're right, Alistair, he said. I thought Nicholas wouldn't come, no matter the rumors. I even feared that he might have died already, to be truthful. He hadn't heard from the other man for over a year already, after all. Alistair Moody shrugged. He was a famous alchemist, even if he doesn't have the Philosopher's Stone anymore. I'm sure he has some other things up his sleeve that would buy him another bit of time, he countered, before he leaned forward in interest, his eyes seeming to be more fixed on the man next to Nicholas than Nicholas himself. Do we know who will inherit the Flamel seat when he is gone? He is the last of the Flamels, Albus shrugged. The family next in line would be mine, I think. Well, he didn't actually think it, he knew it, but it was better when no one knew he had looked it up some weeks ago. In that moment, Flamel reached the Stone of Judgment, stopping next to it with the young man at his side, clearly concerned about Flamel. A helper, someone who looked after the old man and ensured he wouldn't fall. Albus wasn't sure how to place the young stranger, and he was still reeling from the previous surprises to actually think clearly about it. Nevertheless, the stranger, he looked familiar somehow, like a long-forgotten face, suddenly seen again after decades, like someone he should have known or whose relation he had met before. Before he could ponder about it further, Alistair spoke up next to him again. So he is giving up his seat today, Moody observed. You're sure he doesn't have a child, Albus? He seems awfully close to the young man next to him. His children died hundreds of years ago, Albus answered. As far as I know, his line finally ended in squibs. What a tragedy for such an old and mighty house, Alistair murmured, but Albus didn't look at him. He fixed his gaze on his friend, who was standing calmly in front of the obelisk. For a moment Flamel seemed to watch the whispering lords and ladies in front of him, then he took a deep breath and started, but not like everybody else had done before him. Today, Nicholas announced, I will step down from my seat in the Wizengamot and also as a head of house. Even more people started to whisper. Even Albus was surprised. The most of the lords and ladies had guessed that Flamel would give up his seat in the Wizengamot, but that he was also stepping down as a head of house was something no one had suspected. You needed a successor to be able to step down before your time, and the Flamel family had dwindled until there were just Flamel and his wife left. We will have to look up your relations to pass on your seat. As for your headship, you cannot give it up unless you have a direct successor, Lord Flamel. Amelia Bones, who was heading the session, said while smiling softly at the old man. Nicholas Flamel laughed. I know, my dear, I know, he agreed. But don't worry, I have a direct successor from my line in mind. Albus blinked. Surely Flamel would not give him the headship of Flamel, would he? Well, they were good friends, so maybe. So state your successor and your relationship to him. We will hear you out and decide if your relation is enough. Amelia Bones answered. Thank you, my dear, Flamel answered, and his eyes wandered over the crowd before he looked back towards the young man slightly behind him. But the Wizengamot has no right to decide if I have the right to choose my successor or not. Albus frowned at that. Flamel, for all of Nicholas's age, was one of the younger lines, and therefore it didn't have a charter like some of the older lines, like Emrys or Lefay had. Not that Albus could decode where the younger lines ended and the older ones began. There seemed to be no rhyme and reason to the distinction between older and younger, not even age. Not even Slytherin counted as an older line. But the Potters, a line whose name had come up far later than Slytherin, was counted among them. No rhyme and reason, at all, Lord Flamel. But Amelia Bones was interrupted by Nicholas before she could finish her reprimand. I might have to confess something that will explain why this respectable body has no say in my chosen successor, he said slowly. At that their murmurs picked up another notch, something that didn't seem to bother Flamel at all. Albus frowned. Confess? He asked aloud, but just for himself, wondering why Nicholas hadn't just started the proceedings instead of talking about a confession. I have to confess that I have lied to all of you, and I have done it for the last 600 years. Nicholas Flamel spoke up over the crowd's whispers. Lied to us? This time Amelia was not the only one who repeated his words. Yes, Flamel answered, and Albus stared at the old man. What? When I was a young man, the last name I carried was Feared. So when I had the chance to change it when I moved to France, I did. I wasn't born a Flamel. I invented that name. Now it's time to change it back. Now the whispers increased to actual discussions. Albus Dumbledore stared at the man in front of him. He knew that his family was a relation to the Flamels. They both descended from Godric Gryffindor after all, but he had never found even a trace that the man had changed his last name. And not just changed his name. His real name had to be from an old family, a family that had a family charter, unlike the newer ones. Of course, that would also imply that the family had a lot more power than what a younger family had. Albus had never understood why an older family, no matter if they were truly older or not, had more power in the Wizengamot than other families. Blood has power, his father had always said. And the old ones are always closer to their origin than others will ever be. It's just right that they have more power than the rest of us have. Albus had never understood what his father had wanted to tell him with that. He shook that thought off. It didn't matter right now. What mattered was the family that Nicholas was originally part of, and the heir that might end up being Albus himself if he was lucky. Well, that's truly a surprise, Alastor next to him murmured, oddly enough not sounding surprised at all. Albus threw his friend a look, but before he could say more, Nicholas stepped forward and reached for the obelisk. Even from the distance, Albus could see the mischief in his friend's eyes when he took charge of his claim. I am Nicholas Godric, Harry James Lefay, Nicholas Flamel stated, and the murmurs stopped as if a silencing charm had been spoken. I am lord to my line. The stone of judgment lit up, accepting his claim. For a moment people seemed to hold their breath. Then Flamel continued. I call forth the lordship I carry, he said, by blood, by magic, by will. Today, I will give it up. Today, I will step down. Today, I will hand it to my heir, so mote it be. The stone shone brightly in clear acceptance, and Nicholas stepped back. Albus felt dazed. Lefay. Nicholas was head of Lefay. He hadn't even time to think about the implication. Before somebody could comment on it, demand a declaration who the named heir was, the young man next to him stepped forward and reached for the still slightly glowing stone. There was something about the young man. He looked familiar, and yet like a stranger. Albus had no time to think about it, no time to wonder about it, before the young man's hand touched the stone of judgment, and he started to speak. I am Salvazet, Sarandu Harry James Salvati, Amethyst, Emrys Lefay, he stated, his voice a soft, warm baritone. I am the heir to my lines. Soft light surrounded him, showing that he was saying the truth. Next to Albus, Alastor sounded as if he was choking. His eyes, the magical one and the other, were wide in surprise. Sale, he coughed, or seemed to cough. Albus frowned, but he couldn't comment on it, before the young man continued. Stepping up next to his uncle was something that Harry had never expected to do. His eyes traveled over the crowd, took them in. He was a bit surprised when he saw that the Potter seat was actually already occupied. It took a moment before he understood who it was. Xenophilius Lovegood. For whatever reason, the Lovegoods had taken over the Potter seat in his absence, and therefore taken that point of power from Dumbledore. It wasn't what Harry had planned, but it definitely was an interesting development as well. He suppressed his smile at the thought how Dumbledore reacted when he had seen Zeno in the Potter's seat. Stepping forward and taking Nicholas's place, it felt natural, yet nerve-wracking. That feeling vanished the moment his hand touched the stone. Calmness spread from the stone towards him. A natural warmth reached for his arm, the magic in the stone connecting with his own and touching his blood magic. It was a connection that was soothing and felt like home coming. Harry couldn't even say how long it had been since he had felt something like that last. Behind him he could feel the throne starting to glow softly, nearly invisibly. It felt like a mental connection. Something inside him, some part of his magic, reached out towards the wards of the throne and tangled with it. Harry had felt like that before. It had been years, but the connection to the throne had always been there whenever he was part of the Wizengamot. It didn't matter if he ignored the connection. Some part of himself still reached for the magic of the land and therefore the throne. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and let the magic of the obelisk and the magical connection with the throne, weak as it was, wash over himself. Then he started his claim. "I call forth the lordships I carry. I am Lord Lefay, because I was born to my mother, the heir of Lefay." Again soft light of the stone of judgment glowed, but this time a crest appeared behind him, the Lefay crest, a sole white lily on a black grounding. There were murmurs, but it seemed that most had expected that claim since he had come forward at his uncle Nicholas's side. Harry guessed that this might change for the next name he would mention, because while he knew he could have stopped after Lefay, he wasn't willing to do so this time around. "I am Lord Emrys, because I was born to my father, the last Lord Emrys." Again another crest appeared and settled next to the Lefay crest. This time it had a snake in it. It felt good to claim Emrys once more. Harry didn't remember when he had claimed Emrys last, but it didn't matter. In his heart, Emrys was the name that really belonged to himself. He might have been born to his parents, Lily and James, might have been adopted by Henry and Catherine Malfoy, as well as Morgana Le Fay and Arthur Pendragon, but in his heart he had always been his Atra's son, Mirrodin's son. In his heart he was Emrys, so to claim Emrys again was more like coming home than anything else, even more than being back at Hogwarts or touching the stone of judgment. He looked up from the stone, his eyes searching the rows of the Wizengamot. People were gawking at him, disbelief in their faces. And yet, not one of them could protest his claim because the stone of judgment had already agreed that he was saying the truth. "I am Lord Grim, because I was born to my father, the last Lord Grim." And behind him the Potter crest appeared, telling everybody who just wanted to look, wanted to understand, who he really was. Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Grim Le Fay, known to the world as Harry James Potter. Harry wondered how many people knew the truth, knew how to connect the truth that he had been hiding behind his last words right now. Grim. Heir of Grim. Heir of the only immortal not bound by the laws that governed the other immortal Furbolgs. Heir of James Potter. Heir of Charles Potter. Heir of Peverell Grim. And people still refused to count the Potters to the older lines. His eyes met Dumbledore's, just in time to see recognition spreading in the other man's eyes. Albus stared at the last crest behind the stranger. "Grim," the stranger had said. And for a moment, Albus tried to dismiss the similarity, but a single gaze towards the seat Xenophilius Lovegood was occupying told him that he hadn't imagined it. The seat was also glowing softly, but didn't seem to try and evict Xenophilius nevertheless. "The Potter crest. Grim," the young stranger with the familiar face had said. But it was the Potter crest. "Potter." Albus stood, unwilling to sit through the claiming further. He needed to say something. He needed to object. Not only had the young stranger named 3 names, no, he had also named Potter, even under another name, as one of them. This was Harry's seat, not the stranger's, and Albus wouldn't sit by silently and watch how somebody else claimed it. "You have no right to this seat," he called out, not caring that he broke the ritual. The young man stopped and looked up towards him. Others followed suit, a lot of them looking disapproving or were frowning, so Albus decided to elaborate. "This seat belongs to Harry James Potter," he said. "It doesn't matter if you go and rename it, it's still the Potter's seat." The young man's lips curled in amusement. "This seat is Grim," he said, his hand still on the stone, lighting it up again with a further truth. "No matter the name Potter, this seat is Grim and has been Grim for longer than Slytherin line even existed." "This seat is Harry's," Albus said and leaned forward, not willing to give up what he knew to be the truth. "You certainly meant Harry James Salvatio," Amethyst, Grimlefays. Another voice spoke up, and Xenophilius Lovegood leaned forward as well without standing up. At least, that was the boy's name at the time of his birth, given by his birth parents. Albus frowned, but before he could say anything about that, it was Amelia Bones who spoke up. "Care to explain, Mr. Lovegood?" she asked coolly. Lovegood leaned back into his chair with a shrug. "I'm aware that the world thinks the boy's name was Harry James Potter," he said, sounding casual and quite indifferent. "But fact is that my wife was a good friend of Lily Potter, and she knew that Lily and James decided to name their boy traditionally." At that, a lot of people following Albus broke out into furious whispers. The party that belonged to the dark side, on the other hand, looked at each other with incredulity in their eyes. Lily Potter, a known Muggle-born, and she had gone and named her son traditionally. Xenophilius Lovegood seemed to be oblivious to the mayhem he had caused, and instead continued with what he had to say. "Lily named the child Harry James," he said. "James decided on Salvatio, and Sirius, his godfather, on Amethyst. Harry James, Salvatio, Amethyst, Grimlefays." Then he opened his eyes and looked around. "Shouldn't you all more wonder why a child of Grimlefays descendant wasn't given to the Lord Lefay to raise their lord, like law it demands and all that?" This time the dark side started to whisper, while the light side looked at each other uncomfortably. Albus gritted his teeth. That was a question he had never expected to be asked. Back then he had taken on Harry's guardianship, ignoring any other relation Harry still had. Albus had seen it as necessary, but now, the way the others looked at him, it was clear that him sidestepping others for Harry's guardianship might ensure that he lost even more credibility in the Wizengamot. Because, no matter how much Albus wished it was different, in the magical world family was everything, which meant that keeping a child from their family was nearly seen as a crime itself. "So, I ask again," Lovegood continued, his eyes darting around the room, "why have we never talked about something important like that until now, and yet discussed the rightfulness of a claim that was clearly accepted as true?" This time, even the light side had some people frowning at Albus. Amelia Bones was looking at him coolly before she said harshly, "Sit back down, Albus Dumbledore." It was said pointedly, and while it wasn't said disrespectfully, she also hadn't used Lord Dumbledore, which was telling in itself. Albus wanted to object further, but Alastor reached for him and actually forced him to sit. Interrupting a claim, "Albus," he whispered, clearly unhappy, "what were you thinking, old friend?" "I was thinking that I should ensure that Harry still has his inheritance," Albus countered, but before he could say something further, the young man spoke up again. "I am Lord Grim," he said in repeat, the crest behind him flashing with another confirmation. "No other claim exists to that title." Albus expected the light to diminish at the lie. Instead, it brightened again. "That can't be." He stared at the stranger, who now looked back at Albus with contempt. "Harry!" There were murmurs all around Albus now, a lot of them asking about Harry, but before somebody else could voice their questions, the young lord continued, his green eyes now fixed on Albus. "Mine is the line Malfoy to claim, because it were my parents who were the last true Lords Malfoy before me," he said. And this time the crest that appeared was recognized by all members of the Wizengamot. The smile the young man in front of them showed was the smile of a predator. The crest was the Malfoy crest. For a moment Albus stared at the stranger and the Malfoy crest displayed by him, then he turned to search out Lucius Malfoy's seat, which he had ignored until now. Malfoy's face was expressionless, and Albus wondered if the man had known or if he had been as surprised as the rest of them. Moody next to him chuckled. "Finally, I understand why Lucius Malfoy never wore his family ring," he snickered. "I never thought there was a Malfoy still alive to claim lordship." Albus turned to look at his friend. He had expected a lot, but not that. Never that. "You knew?" Albus asked, astonished. "Of course, Albus," Moody said. "I learned it as a child, didn't you?" "No," Albus nearly choked when he had to admit that he was clueless until now. His brain was furiously trying to remember if he had ever heard something along these lines. But his father's lessons had been long ago and he couldn't remember anybody else mentioning something like that ever before. Obviously, from the faces of quite a lot of the dark side, the most of them hadn't known as well. Albus wondered if that meant that he could use the young man to ensure that Voldemort lost the support of the Malfoys. Then a second thought came to him. The rumors of Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy's deaths. Had the return of their Lord of House anything to do with it? Had the young man approached them before today and told them to break ties with Voldemort? And if he had, why was Lucius here instead of still in hiding? Harry watched the crowd at his declarations. The discussion about Potter couldn't have gone better. He had expected the interruption, had counted on it to seed some doubt in the other lords and ladies when it came to Dumbledore, but he had never thought that it would turn out that well. Xenophilius Lovegood was an unexpected help with knowledge that Harry might have known, but had known without the backing except of the fact that he had time traveled. Zeno, on the other hand, had a legal way of knowing those facts, and had used it to bring it under the people. Harry noticed that there were more than one considering gaze thrown his way, and he wondered how many of them had noticed what Zeno had implied. "You certainly meant Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Grim Lefayes," he had said. At least that was the boy's name at the time of his birth, given by his birth parents. Birth parents. A name given by his birth. Harry James Salvatio Amethyst Grim Lefay. Salvasaha Serendu. Harry James Salvatore Amethyst Emrys Lefay. From the length of Harry's true name alone, one could guess that not only was he traditionally named, but also that he had been adopted before. Traditionally named meant 3 first names, one from the mother, one from the father, and one from the godfather. 2 additional names could have only come from an adoption. If you knew traditions, the truth was lying open. Amelia Bones had started to look at him in a different light after Zeno's revelation. The same went for Augusta and Neville Longbottom, as well as a lot of lords and ladies from the dark or neutral fractions. And yet Albus Dumbledore's gaze had remained void of any kind of recognition. That, more than anything else, spoke against him in Harry's eyes. Traditions were important, and while a name was just a name, spurning smaller traditions like that didn't speak well for the important, greater ones like feasts and rituals and magic. And now, shown that example, more than one person finally could see it. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to save them in the end. Harry's hand tightened on the stone. It was time. Time to start anew. Finally. "There's just one thing left to say. Now," he said, suddenly whispering. "I gave this name to those I loved, and now that they're gone, I take it back." It was time to call the Grand Family into being. Albus expected the young man to finish his claim. He expected him to step away and make room for somebody else. Instead, the young man looked at Nicholas Flamel briefly, and they exchanged a nod. Then he looked up, suddenly looking more regal than Albus had ever seen another wizard look like. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft, yet heard clearly throughout the chamber, and it bore a weight that seemed to linger even when he took a break from speaking. "There's just one thing left to say now," Emrys Lefay stated. "I gave this name to those I loved, and now that they're gone, I take it back." At those words, a pressure seemed to build in the Wizengamot chamber, and suddenly even the last one of the lords and ladies fixed their attention on the young man staking his claim. There was just one ritual calling that started this way. Albus had never seen it happen before. A name had been given away, had been handed down to somebody else. A name had been given away and was now reclaimed. Everybody knew what that meant. The only way to give a name away was by adoption. A child was adopted as an heir and therefore gained the name even though it wasn't of their family's blood. A reclaiming of that name never meant good things. It either meant a death of the heir or a banishment of the adopted child from the line. Albus shuddered, but before he could wonder what happened, the young man spoke up again. "I gave my name away, and it has fallen in the eyes of men," he said with a sad tone in his voice. Albus was intrigued. To take back a fallen house was something that normally didn't happen. To take back a fallen house would mean to root out the members who weren't in line with the house's family politics, who had discredited it in the first place, and then to take back those people who were still worthy of the house. Albus wondered why the young man even bothered when he had other houses he could lean on. It would be tiresome to look up all the information to find those who were responsible for the fall of the house, and Albus expected that the young man would ask for leave so that he had time to find the culprits. Instead, Salvassar Serendu Harry James, Salvacel, Amethyst, Imrus Le Fay continued as if he had known the culprits all along. "I redeem my house," the young lord stated. "I redeem its name, its honor and its association. I am the only one who carries its name, but I will take back those who were born to it." Now, everyone leaned forward. Everyone knew that now the relations of the house would be stated, the heir named and finally the house instated as a redeemed one. Those who wouldn't be named wouldn't belong to the house any longer. This was the most horrible way to be banned from a house, and also the most effective. Albus had never thought that the young man would redeem his house in front of the whole Wizengamot. Redemption like that had just happened 2 times since the founding of the Wizengamot. "He's casting people officially out of a house?" Albus asked, horrified. "He does," Moody said grimly. "I wish I knew which house has fallen so deeply that he doesn't see another way to redeem it as its lord." Albus also wanted to know, a fallen house like that would either be a help for Voldemort or against him. It were the members that mattered. And the members the young lord would take back would be named next. "I will take back the Longbottoms because they have lived their life in honor." Every head turned to Augusta and Neville Longbottom, who kept their faces expressionless. Normally, people were named who belonged to a house, not houses, except the house itself was so old that other houses had come from it. But that did just happen when the first one belonging to the new house was a younger son of the original one, who had changed his name when he married. Albus knew that if the Longbottoms once belonged to said house, the name change had happened centuries ago. There was just the question, if the Longbottoms accepted the claim on their house. In the end, if they did, they would be allies to the house of the young lord. If they didn't, they still could be allies, but their bond wouldn't be a strong one, just as strong as every ally bond in politics. But there were other benefits, too. A house who was the subject of another was shielded from others, and sometimes also had a financial benefit, because the main house would support them, even if they had money themselves. "I will take back the Prewets because they have had the courage to live their life slyly and had the courage to stand by their allies," the young man continued. Another house claimed by Imrus Le Fay. This time no one reacted. The Prewets were extinguished, and because of that it did not matter if they were taken in, as it would not change anything, or so they thought until the young man continued. "As it is, the name of Prewet has vanished, so I will give it back. Coming from a daughter of my house, I will cherish her blood, whose blood mingled with the son who became Prewet. As such I will take in the Weasleys. They are my kin. Their second born will be Prewet again." Now the Wizengamot was in an uproar. The Weasleys were a lesser, absolutely poor family who did not have a seat in the Wizengamot, but the Prewets had. As such, the second-born Weasley son would have definitely a seat, and the firstborn also, if the house that the young man was reinstating was powerful enough to upgrade the status of the Weasley house. It would be a social upgrade to a family the most of the wizards and witches in the Wizengamot despised. Amelia shot a loud spell in the air, and the wizards and witches quieted down again. The young lord smirked, and then he continued with his bombshells. "I also take back the Prince family. They are my heir of this house, until I will have sons of my own." The noise increased again. "He is naming an heir out of one of the families he takes back." Albus whispered, horrified at the implied power the boy was giving the Prince family. "He cannot do that. Unless the family had been the heirs to begin with," Moody said. "The family name must have fallen far that even the heir had to give it up in the end." Albus looked at Moody with wide eyes. "What family?" Moody shrugged. "I don't know. I am not sure I ever heard of a family fallen so deeply," he answered uneasily. Albus was sure Moody was lying and had detected a pattern all the others hadn't. It looked as if Moody was suddenly half hopeful, half terrified, as if he knew or at least had a solid guess, a guess he was hoping for and at the same time was terrified about the idea that he was right. "Since there is no one with the name Prince left, I will give the title to the only one who can carry it. Severus Snape will be reinstated as a prince." He is the one who will carry its title. This time Albus's face darkened. He knew that Severus had loved his mother dearly and had longed to carry on her name, but was denied it because of his blood status as a half-blood with a Muggle father. Severus's grandparents had despised the idea that the ancient and noble house of Prince would be in the hands of a mere half-blood, and so they denied him his inheritance. That he was now granted the title was something that would sweep the sour man to the side of the young man who was standing in front of the Wizengamot. Albus wasn't sure if Severus would continue spying if he heard that announcement. "I'll have to stay silent about that one," he thought. "I cannot afford to lose him." The young man continued. "Since the Prince family has fathered 2 other families, I'll also take in the Greengrass family, because they're honorable in their beliefs, and the Zabinis, because they stand their ground against temptation." "Well, that's a family," Alistair murmured. 2 chronically light families and 3 constant grey ones as potential parts of the Grand House. Their alliance would make an utter chaos in the Wizengamot. "Good that it won't happen then," Albus said, sighing. "I don't think the grey families will ally themselves with the light, and the light also won't ally themselves with the grey. It is more likely that just the grey or just the light will take on the offer." "Yes," Moody said, "but they will still have quite a standing. Don't forget the lad carries the names of Emrys and Lefay, nevertheless the other 2 minor families." Albus nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe we should approach the young lord after the Wizengamot session," Albus said. "He could help us against our enemy, and Albus would have a little more control over the 3 grey families or the Longbottoms, whoever would not deny the relation the young lord offered. Of course there was still the matter with Harry and his own family." Albus guessed that if he could actually talk to the young man, maybe he would be able to regain the Potter seat for Harry. It was only fair that the boy got his inheritance, after all, no matter what the Stone of Judgment said or not. "Maybe you should listen to the end before thinking ahead," Moody said, and Albus was sure that his friend definitely had an idea which family was reinstated. "I will also accept the Malfoy family as closekin through my daughter's house, the Weasleys," the young lord said at that moment. Now everyone stared at him, then at Lucius Malfoy, whose face seemed to be frozen in an emotionless mask. Albus was pretty sure that Lucius would deny the relation as soon as he was allowed to speak. No Malfoy would ever name a Weasley cousin. Albus guessed by the naming of a closekin that the young lord was nearly finished with rebuilding this ominous house. The last part missing before he could name the redeemed house would be the names of the relations he would banish from the house. "Finally, as it was done before, I will do it again," the young lord said, and again whisper erupted. It was unusual to deny relations to a person or a house more often than once. Normally the house would lose its claim to the family after being banned once, and as such wouldn't be counted anymore. So why did the young lord deny relations again? "I will deny any relations to the Gaunt family. They were never the children of a daughter of my house, and they will never be. So be it, so mote it be." The whisper increased. Albus stared at the young man, a sinking feeling in his stomach. "An oath to deny a house? Gaunt?" Albus whispered to himself. "The house is related to Gaunt." That was disconcerting, and the only redeeming thing Albus could see in that fact was that the house was denying its relationship to that family. Still, Gaunt, that didn't bode well, denied relation or not. And it hadn't even been that great of a relation in the first place. Just a daughter married into the Gaunt line, a daughter who had been banished from the house she had came from, Gaunt. But why deny a house that has already been declared extinguished? Albus couldn't help but wonder, except, no one knew, so this couldn't be the reason, could it? But why then? Tom, Albus thought frantically. Tom. But as much as Tom would have been a reason, the relation between Gaunt and Voldemort wasn't something that was official knowledge. So why go and banish a house that was officially extinguished? Except, Albus looked at the young man. Did he know? Did he know? And if he did, how? Albus was losing his thoughts when the young man continued. "I have redeemed my family. I have redeemed its name, its honor, its association," the young lord said. "I name it proud, I name it sly, I name it cunning, I name it the child of the lily. I name it the heir of the basilisk. Albus started at that statement. Basilisk and Lily? He knew that those two had to be important parts of the crest, but he had never heard of a crest like that. When he looked at Moody, he saw him smiling, his eyes gleaming. Whatever house Moody had in mind, he had been confirmed. And then the young lord finally said what Albus wanted to know. I call my family's name since I am the founder. I name it Slytherin. So be it, so was it, so mote it be. Gasps filled the hall. Everyone looked at each other while the last crest appeared behind the young man. Then the crest suddenly lightened up and shot back into the young man's body. His claim had been verified. Slytherin, Albus stated faintly, forgetting that the young man had named himself the founder of Slytherin and not the Lord. Even a redeemed house still had just one founder, the man who had first carried the name which later belonged to the family. Moody snickered. And he redeemed the house, he said, still grinning like mad. Albus could understand his friend somehow. Moody had been a Slytherin in Hogwarts after all. But he himself still could not grasp the facts. That cannot be. The house of Slytherin is extinguished, Albus said, still with a low, breathless voice. I would say it simply went into hiding. Moody said, grinning, I would never have guessed that this Wizengamot session will be one of the most interesting ones ever. The other wizards around him still whispered the name of the family that had come back to life. The most of them were as speechless as Albus felt. No one had thought that maybe a founder's house would return to them today. In that moment, Lord Greengrass stood. Greengrass accepts to be subjects to Slytherin, he said loudly over the stunned silence of the chamber. And suddenly everyone started to talk at once, all with huge eyes and an absolutely flabbergasted expression on their faces. Lord Greengrass sat down again, a smug expression on his face. Albus could understand it. Greengrass was a Slytherin. Being related to the founder himself, even if it may be just through adoption, was something every Slytherin dreamed of. Next to him, Blaise Zabini, new Lord Zabini, also stood. One moment he looked unsure at his mother, then his face changed into a cool mask. Zabini also accepts to be subjects to Slytherin, he said, loud enough to be heard everywhere in the chamber. Again murmur erupted. Now it was sure that the new house Slytherin would consist of the grey families that belonged to it. Of course not every family would be able to state their alliance today. The families that weren't there would do so at home in private after getting a missive about the declaration and who belonged to the house already. Albus was sure the Weasleys would deny the invitation as soon as they read the names of the joined families. The only ones that had to declare themselves today would be the Longbottoms and the head of Malfoy, as he had been invited, not the Lord Malfoy. Albus was sure that both would decline. Malfoy would never accept an alliance that would maybe force him to stay away from Voldemort, and that would associate him with the Weasleys and the Longbottoms. Finally, Augusta and Neville Longbottom stood up. Albus knew that the Longbottoms were firmly light. He guessed that they would sever the ties the young lord had knotted and declare themselves independent from Slytherin. They were a family of Gryffindors after all. Being related to Slytherin would grant them nothing. Still, Albus mourned that the reinstated family had to be Slytherin. They didn't need a new dark family in the Wizengamot. The only good thing he could see was that the young lord had unknowingly severed the ties of the family to Voldemort himself. He turned his attention back to the Longbottoms. A last time Augusta and her grandson looked at each other, then the lady nodded. Longbottom declares itself subject to Slytherin, Augusta said. At that the noise increased tenfold. It seems as if the most of them had guessed that Longbottom would deny relationship. Albus was flabbergasted that they hadn't, even more because the Greengrass and Zabini families had declared themselves subjects before the Longbottoms had. All in all, the firmly white Longbottom family had accepted grey cousins and a house as black as the night as their grand family. In that moment Lucius Malfoy stood slowly. Everyone quieted down and looked at the Malfoy family head. Even if he was not the lord of his family, he still was the head of Malfoy. The Malfoy family accepts to be close kin to the Weasley family, he said. The answer was staring. Of course, Slytherin was a mighty house, But accepting to be close kin to a family the Malfoys despised, that was definitely something different. Albus felt suddenly lightheaded. He could not grasp that the young lord in front of him had been able to throw out a simple lash and pulled in everyone he had aimed at. Why had the Longbottoms declared themselves subjects to Slytherin? Why had Lucius Malfoy decided to be close kin to Weasley? What was he missing? Moody next to him shook his head, snorting. "Damn brat," he murmured. "We will have to watch our backs now. Damn silver tongue of his." Albus just stared at his friend, too stunned to ask what Moody meant. And he wasn't the only one. The chamber was quiet for a moment, so quiet you would have been able to hear a pin drop. Greengrass, Sabini, Malfoy, Longbottom. 4 names, 4 agreements. I need to talk to the Weasleys, he thought, feeling desperate. He knew that if the Weasleys really agreed, there could be repercussions not only for them, but for Albus's side as well. At the moment, the Weasleys were fully under Albus's protection, but if they stepped out and agreed to joining the family, Albus wouldn't be able to protect them any longer. He gritted his teeth and decided that he would have to ensure that he was able to talk to the Weasleys before they heard that they were asked to join a grand family. He needed them to understand what it meant and the consequences of it. Before he could think further about it, Amelia spoke up. "Well," Amelia finally said, "maybe we should continue with the new lords." For a moment there was silence. Then the next lord stepped forward and Albus couldn't help but clench his fists again. It was somebody he hadn't expected. Somebody he hadn't wanted there at all. "I am Charles Pruitt," Charlie Weasley said. "I am heir to my line." Alastor next to him shifted. "So, Pruitt is back," he grumbled. "Was time, I guess?" Albus turned and stared at his friend. "Pruitt," he started to say, but was interrupted by Alastor. "Wonder why you didn't tell one of the Weasleys to claim that seat years ago. They could have just helped us here, don't you think so too?" Yes, they could have, but it also made them a target, and Albus had thought that it would have been better for them to keep far away from politics, because as nice as they were, not one of the Weasleys was trained in politics. Of course, then Charlie had to make it worse than he already had with his last sentence. "Pruitt declares itself subject to Slytherin. This is going to be Charlie's death sentence," he thought grimly. "Voldemort won't let that stand. He will kill Charlie the moment he hears about it. Because with Charlie, with Pruitt even as subject to Slytherin, the light would gain influence, something that the Dark Lord wouldn't accept." Albus mourned for Charlie already. Well, at least he did until the next announcement. Because the next people who entered the Wizengamot were the Weasleys, and they accepted Slytherin's claim as well. Of course, the person after was even worse. Severus shuddered. The pressure in the air surrounding him strengthened. Some of the other Death Eaters stopped and looked at each other, and then in the air. The air seemed to hum, as if electricity was running through it. "What?" Severus interrupted himself, his eyes roving through the alley. "It's an old spell," Lovegood replied, as if he had finished the question. "Even with the preparation Hufflepuff put in, it takes some time to charge it." "Charge it," Severus repeated. "A spell?" Lovegood looked at him in amusement while the humming got louder and louder. "You should go, Professor," she said. "The Eternal Prince is waiting." "It's time," the vampire agreed, and with his last word the pressure surrounding them finally broke. There was a flash, brighter than the sun, and the humming stopped. For a second or two Severus could see nothing at all, but his ears still functioned. There were voices all around him, voices whimpering and groaning. Then his sight returned. Lovegood still stood in front of him, her eyes trained on him. "It's time, Professor," she said. "Don't make him wait any longer." For a moment he hesitated. He was tempted to look around, but he forced himself to ignore it. The sounds told him enough. The raid was over. There would be no deaths by Death Eaters in Diagon Alley anymore today. It was over. The raid was done, and there was no need to look around to assure himself that. He took a short moment to take another breath, decided that the raid definitely wasn't his pigeon any longer. Should someone else pay for the failure? Severus had to be somewhere else. With that thought he apparated away. He left Diagon Alley, left Lovegood and Uncle Anna, and a ward over an alley that stopped every attack and every attacker before they could hurt anybody else. Diagon Alley was safe. The battle surrounding Diagon Alley definitely was won by another side than Voldemort's, and it hadn't been Dumbledore's side either. With that thought, Severus decided to go where he was actually needed, and that wasn't in Diagon Alley any longer. Operating to the Ministry ensured that he reached the chambers of the Wizengamot meeting just in time to hear the Weasleys declaring themselves to Slytherin. For a moment Severus hesitated, his eyes searching the crowd until he found Sal's gaze. The other man was sitting in a chair that had been empty for centuries, a chair that Severus hadn't expected him in. It wasn't Potter, because in Potter's chair sat Xenophilius Lovegood, something that Severus hadn't expected as well. It wasn't Slytherin, even though he had obviously claimed Slytherin as a grand family, because otherwise Weasley wouldn't himself declared subject to Slytherin. And it wasn't Le Fay. Instead, old Flamel was sitting in the chair that showed, like with Lovegood, that he was a proxy and not the Lord. No, he was sitting in Emrys' chair. Of course it was Emrys' chair. Severus wasn't even sure why he was surprised that the other man had chosen Merlin's family's place as his seating. In that moment, poisonous green eyes met Severus's own black ones. Sal nodded once. It seemed to be every bit of endorsement some hidden part in Severus needed, because something inside of him relaxed at that nod. And Severus stepped out and up towards the obsidian. There were murmurs all around when people started to recognize him. Death Eater, he heard murmured. Dark Wizard. He ignored it, but he reached for his arm, deactivating the illusion of a dark mark he had worn until today. Deactivating it reminded him that he wasn't alone any longer, that he wasn't just a Death Eater turned spy anymore. It felt reliving to finally show it today. For a moment he looked at his employer. Albus was sitting in his chair, his eyes darting from Arthur Weasley to Charlie Pruitt and back. Severus looked away, and instead reached for the obelisk. The stone felt cool under his hand when he finally touched it. For a moment it just felt like stone, then warmth seemed to creep up into Severus's hand from it, warming it. "I am Severus Tobias Prince," Severus said, the words seeming to come to him from the stone under his hand. "I am heir of my line." It was only while speaking those words that Severus understood that he had given up the last name he had used since he was a child. The moment he had stepped up to take lordship, he wasn't a Snape anymore. He was a prince now. Because, unlike in the Muggle world, last names were a lot easier to change in the magical world, and they meant a lot more than just a name to tell the lines apart. They told people about the magic resting in the veins of the people using it, and they warned people about the danger they posed. And while he was able to claim Prince, he also knew that if Sal hadn't been, he would have been able to claim Slytherin with the same ease as he was claiming Prince right now. Being accepted as the Lord Prince by the lights surrounding him was just the last confirmation. The feeling of the obelisk under his fingers had told him that he was accepted long before he even finished his claim. He felt Albus Dumbledore's eyes on him. He could see the shock in the other man's face, far too great for the other man to be able to hide it any longer. For a moment, Severus wondered if it might not end in a heart attack for the older man. He should feel guilty, he knew. Instead, he spoke the words that would declare him independent, not only of Albus Dumbledore, but also of Voldemort. Prince declares itself subject to Slytherin. The murmurs turned into loud discussions at that. Severus couldn't help but feel a bit smug about it. There was no better way to flip the bird at not only the Dark Lord but also Albus. Stepping up and taking his seat was just the icing of the cake. For a moment there was silence in the room. Clearly a lot of people were still reeling from Severus's declaration and the declarations of the other people before. Then Amelia Bones got the Wizengamot really started. It started with the usual, one tedious discussion after another. Laws that some lords had prepared were introduced, old discussions about cauldron thickness and other bagatelles like that. There was even a discussion about a private feud or two thrown in just to mix things up a bit. It was the usual. It was what had always been part of the Wizengamot. Some more restrictions for Muggleborns proposed from the dark side, some more opening to the Muggles proposed from the light side, and Slytherin kept their distance, just watching, not adding anything, not unusual for new lords and alliances in the first meeting of the year. The first meeting wasn't there to solve anything. It was there for introduction to the new lords and for an overview of things the fractions wanted to reach that year. It wasn't there for more. It had never been, so far. It was a day the lords and ladies knew that they were watched by the rest of the population far closer than normally, so the meeting contained propaganda and a try to establish oneself in the public eye. Anything else? Amelia Bones asked finally. Sal stood up. His eyes swept over the rest of his fellow lords. House Emrys asks to be heard, he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. House Emrys has the word, Amelia agreed. For a moment, Sal looked around some more, his eyes finding Severus's and some of the others before he spoke up again. House Emrys demands accountability from the ministry for its breach of its own laws, he said, his voice echoing some more through the chamber. Silence! And then, chaos broke out and people started to shout, to discuss, and to accuse Sal as a liar.